Be addressed to the chair. What I have asked of members and of our guests today is when the exchange is happening, keep an eye on each other, because you'll see a little bit of a nod to say I want the floor back, and that would just help with me having to interrupt, because I would like to maximize the time that we have. And we have with us today the Right Honourable David Johnston, Independent Special Rapporteur on Foreign Interference, to declare any conflicts of interest. He was the president at the University of Waterloo when I not only attended but graduated. So we do know each other from the region of Waterloo. And I'm going to, Mr. Johnston gave up to 10 minutes for your opening comments. And before I do that, there is some rumblings and thoughts that there might be votes taking place today. As there might be votes, I would just like agreement that the vote that takes place, if it does during opening comments or the first round of questions, we would be in agreement to use the voting app and to continue working. Are we okay with that? I will pause just to make sure everyone can get their pictures in. And then once everyone's set and in place, we will continue. That would maximize our time together. And I'm also going to, because we have 3 hours together, just change up the way we do questions. We will start off with 10-minute rounds instead of 6 minutes, and then we will continue with the normal 5-5, 2.5, 2.5, 5-5. And we will take a pause halfway through the through the meeting, just to have a quick break as needed. With that, Mr. Johnston, the floor is yours. Bienvenue à la comité PROC.
Welcome to the PROC committee. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for having me today to speak on this important issue and the work I'm conducting. Merci de m'accueillir.
Thank you for welcoming today to talk about this question.
Of this year, I was appointed by the government as the Independent Special Rapporteur on Foreign Interference with a broad mandate to assess the extent of foreign interference and make recommendations on how to better protect our democracy. My first report found that foreign governments, including the People's Republic of China, are working in hostile and clandestine ways to undermine our democracy. I came to that conclusion after an intensive review of top-secret intelligence and interviews with senior intelligence, security, and elected officials. Methods of foreign interference are rapidly becoming more sophisticated. I have identified significant shortcomings in the government's ability to detect, deter, and combat this threat. This must be remedied urgently. C'est pourquoi la prochaine...
That is why the next phase of my work, which will be a public process, will look at how to best fight foreign interference. Beginning next month, I will hold public hearings where Canadians will be able to hear publicly from government representatives, experts, and security and intelligence officials. And critically, we will hear from those diaspora communities who are most impacted by the hostile efforts of foreign governments. For this work, I will be supported by 3 special advisors with expertise in national security intelligence, law, and diaspora community matters. Together, we will develop recommendations on the urgent changes necessary to protect Canada's democratic institutions and, crucially, Canadians' faith in these institutions.
I think it important that I acknowledge the motion passed last week in the House of Commons. I have deep respect for the House of Commons and for its right to express an opinion on my work. I have heard clearly the disagreement with my recommendations not to call a public inquiry, as well as allegations about my integrity and my independence. These allegations are, put simply, false, and the decision to repeat them does not make them true. The issue of foreign interference deserves serious and robust debate. I will continue to invite disagreement on my recommendations, but will not be deterred from completing my work. I would respectfully remind this committee and all Canadians that I've not simply asked you to take me at my word. Experts and parliamentarians with the necessary security clearance will be able to review not only my work, but also the detailed intelligence on which it's based. Should NSICOP, NSIRA, and opposition leaders disagree with my conclusions, I have asked them to say so publicly, which they are very much permitted to do. En conclusion,
To conclude, I wish to remind Canadians and the members of this committee that my mandate is only one part of an array of work and initiatives that can be undertaken to detect, deter, and fight against foreign interference.
Canadians and the members of this committee that my mandate is only one part of an array of work and initiatives that can be undertaken to address this threat. Therefore, I encourage the contributions of others, including this committee, to help ensure Canada is well equipped to detect, deter, and combat foreign interference. Thank you, and I welcome questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston, for those opening comments. I will share that the bells are ringing. The screen is on for everyone's information. I do believe we can get through our first two rounds. So I will start at 10 minutes to you, Mr. Brock, followed by 10 minutes to Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Brock.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be splitting my time with my colleague, Mr. Barrett. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Johnston. Thank you for your attendance today. Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Johnston, in 2010, Justin Trudeau, as a private citizen before entering into politics, told CBC Radio that you were a great dinner companion. He specifically said, quote, "We had great conversations around dinner tables, around all sorts of things." This was said around the same time that you were being appointed as our Governor General. Were you aware of that statement, sir?
Madam Chair, I was not aware of that statement in connection with Mr. Trudeau. My meeting with him occurred when he was 10 or 11 years old, skiing with my children 4 or 5 times.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. We'll get into those areas. My time is very limited, sir. Sir, I got another question for you. As Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau described you as a lifelong family friend, a friendship cemented over many summers as neighboring cottagers in the Laurentians. You never corrected the Prime Minister in his characterization of your relationship with him. Isn't that correct?
Madam Chair, the connection I had with Mr. Trudeau.
Mr. Johnston, I apologize for interrupting you, but the question is, did you?
I'm going to pause. I didn't think it'd be this early into the meeting, Mr. Brock. You and I have had an exchange before, so you know very well that comments are through the chair. I can assure you that the Prime Minister and I have not gone to the cottage together. And so I would just say that if we can just pause and take a second, that's why I wanted to provide a little bit more time. I will provide leniency to ensure that we get to where you need to get to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the question to Mr. Johnston was, did you characterize or did you change that statement that Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister made to you about you being a lifelong family friend cemented over many summers as neighboring cottagers in the Laurentians? Did you confirm or deny that, sir?
Madam Chair, I was not familiar with the statement that has just been made. I was friends of the father of Mr. Trudeau through his life in politics, and when we tried to engage him with the University of Montreal to be a professor on his return. My last particular meeting with the current Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. I'm going to be getting into areas where you can expand upon things that you've done with the Prime Minister. I need to move on. My time is limited. In 2016, 6 years into your role as Governor General, you gave an interview to the CTV. You were asked about your views of having the Trudeau family living on the grounds of Rideau Hall. Without pause or hesitation, you said it was wonderful because their children played with your grandchildren in the garden. That was pretty exciting to have the next generation together, bringing the place alive. That statement was accurate, correct?
Madam Chair, I don't remember that particular statement, but it is true that the Trudeau family lived in
Thank you,
Rideau
Mr.
College.
Johnston. You further stated in the same interview that the Trudeaus were very good
Madam Chair.
tenants.
Point of order, Mr. Turnbull.
Seen now repeated Mr. PROC cutting off the witness when he's not being given the chance to respond. I would appreciate it if at least we could just let Mr. Johnston respond to the question he's being asked. I think that's decorum and normal practice.
Madam Chair, if I may respond, my time is very limited. The question was centered on as to whether or not the statement was accurate. It did not require the witness to elaborate.
I'm just going to respond really quickly, and I feel that PROC has high ratings. We've been here for a long time. I think you know how I operate as chair now as well. And I do believe these points of orders and me interrupting, which I don't want to do, actually just takes away from the time that we're talking about being so precious. Allowing the witness to finish a sentence, I do not think would take too much time, and I think it's appropriate just to let the witness answer. Mr. PROC, I agree the time is yours, but let's just be mindful, and I think we can get through this. And I know you can, Mr. PROC, so I'm going to pass you back the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You further stated that your wife Sharon and yourself became good friends with the Trudeaus, that your relationship with Pierre Trudeau went back to children's days when the families would get together to ski at Mount Tremblant. You stated that the 3 Trudeau boys were the same age as your 5 daughters, that you became a ski party at Mont Tremblant. You stated that your children had enormous respect for Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He was a wonderful father and very good with the children who at this point were teenagers, that he would lead them into discussions such as democracies in the world. And then in 2017, sir, you interviewed with Paul Wells. You talked of knowing Justin Trudeau since he was 6 years old, as both families shared adjacent cottages in the Laurentians. In 2017, sir, the Prime Minister paid tribute to you, calling you a family friend and a friend of his father. He ended his comments by saying to both of you and your wife, "Thank you, my friends." You privately or publicly did not object to the assessment of your friendship with Justin Trudeau. Now let's fast forward to your press conference of May the 23rd. You were on record stating the following basic facts of your so-called friendship with Justin Trudeau. Your words, sir, that when your children were ages 7 to 12, you had a condo at the foot of Mount Tremblant. Pierre Elliott Trudeau had a country home 50 kilometers away. On 5 occasions over 7 years, he and his 3 kids came and parked their car in the lot. On 1 occasion, you drove the kids back to their mother's house. You knew Justin Trudeau as a student at McGill. You had no contact with Justin Trudeau until he was an elected MP and later as Prime Minister. The point is, for 40 years, you said, sir, I had no contact with JT, Justin Trudeau, not as a friend. Those are the facts. Later that day, you interviewed with CTV anchor Omar Sakajina and stated your relationship with Justin Trudeau was an unfortunate allegation. You largely confirmed the same details as your press conference, but changed the frequency of ski trips to 5 occasions over 2 to 3 years, as opposed to over 7 years. Now, Mr. Johnston, what we had before this committee are 2 completely different descriptions of your relationship with Justin Trudeau. Those 2 different descriptions cannot be accurate at the same time. So my question is simple and direct, Mr. Johnston. Were you telling Canadians the truth on May the 23rd or back in 2016?
Madam Chair, telling the truth with connection with my relationship with Prime Minister Trudeau goes back to when our children were teenagers, and during the course of almost 40 years, we had no meetings, no dinners at one another's homes, no particular contact. Was a friend of the father, etc., but those were the extent of the contacts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll resume the time there. Sir, you were a member of the Trudeau Foundation until your appointment to this position. Is that correct?
I was a member, Madam Chair, I was a member of the Trudeau Foundation, member of the association, which is like shareholders in general meeting of the Trudeau Foundation, not a member of the board of directors. I joined it in 2018, just a year or so after I stepped down as Governor General, because I've had a very long concern and interest in student support, graduate student scholarships. And the role as a member of the association is to attend annual general meetings, vote in the board of directors.
Thank you, sir.
I have had nothing to do whatsoever with any of the decision-making of the Trudeau Foundation.
Were you aware of the reporting that the Trudeau Foundation was targeted for a foreign influence campaign by Beijing and that the foundation accepted $140,000 from the communist dictatorship in Beijing?
Madam Chair, the first knowledge I had of that particular gift was when it appeared in the newspaper. And as a member of the association, I received a memo from the CEO, like I think other members of the association. That
Thank you, sir.
It started a press release indicating that that gift was being returned.
Thank you for confirming your knowledge of it. Given your ties to the foundation's involvement with Beijing, and Beijing's role in your report, do you see a conflict of interest?
Madam Chair, my connection with the association of the Trudeau Foundation had no role whatsoever with the decision-making of the board of directors, the acceptance of gifts and so on.
Thank you, sir.
And
You've been friends with Frank Iacobucci for decades, is that correct?
Madam Chair, Professor Iacobucci and I were young law professors at the University of Toronto, I think when I was about 25. And yes, he's been a lifelong friend.
And Mr. Iacobucci, also a member of the Trudeau Foundation, is who you sought out an opinion from on the matter of whether or not you were in a conflict of interest, for which he provided you the exemption or excuse that you were looking for.
Madam Chair, Professor Iacobucci, Justice Iacobucci, was not a member of the Trudeau Foundation. He was a mentor to one or two students who were scholars of the foundation. The function of the foundation is not only to provide scholarships, but to provide the possibility of mentorship for those students by people who are respected in their area.
Thank you,
and
sir.
He served in that capacity. And yes, when allegations were made about me having a conflict of interest,
thank you, sir.
He knows me for a long time, and he indicated I had none.
Sir, I believe there's at least 12 retired Supreme Court justices who aren't associated with the Trudeau Foundation, like Mr. Iacobucci. Mr. Iacobucci's law firm, Torys LLP, was also hired. You hired them to assist you, and working for Torys was longtime Liberal donor Sheila Block. So we have you with an association to the Trudeau Foundation. We have Mr. Iacobucci, who is associated with the Trudeau Foundation. We have Ms. Block, who is a lifetime donor and supporter of the Liberal Party, including attending fundraising events with the Prime Minister in recent time. Given all of that, you don't see a conflict of interest?
Madam Chair, with respect to the question of Ms. Block, she is a preeminent counsel.
The question is with respect to conflict of interest, sir.
Okay, pause. So you just took 23 seconds to ask that? Let's just provide the witness 23 seconds to answer that. And now I can't believe that I'm sitting here timing how much time it's taking for the questions so the answer so that I can run a functional meeting. When members have all asked for 3 hours of time of this person. 3 hours, that's a long time to be meeting. And then we talk about how important our time is, but then you want me to keep interrupting. So, Mr. Johnston, the floor is yours.
Madam Chair, I do not see a conflict. Sheila Block is a preeminent counsel. She served me very faithfully when I was invited by Prime Minister Harper to undertake another very difficult inquiry 15 years or so ago. She is renowned for the quality of her work, and it's certainly important work that's done well. But that said, the conclusions in the report are mine. Whatever lawyers in practice or others do with respect to contributions to political campaigns, these are all on public record and well understood.
Thanks for being here, Mr. Johnston. I would say we all owe you a debt of gratitude for your service to Canada over decades. And I want to thank you for the many roles that you've taken on and faithfully served and fulfilled, and the latest role that you've taken on. And I do, recognize that your report has come with some, some questions, and there's been some concerns that others have expressed. But maybe I'll quote PM Harper, which I don't often do. When you were appointed originally as the Governor General, he said that you represent the best of Canada. And I appreciate the fact that you're here today in front of all the parliamentary members answering our questions for 3 hours. It really is a testament to your, service to Canada. I also want to start by just, mentioning a few things that we've heard here at this committee, online, in press conferences, and in House proceedings. So Mr. Calkins has said Han Dong is an agent of Beijing. Pierre Poilievre has said repeatedly Justin Trudeau is acting against Canada's interest in favor of a foreign dictatorship. That was on March 7th. Pierre Poilievre also said the PM expressed his admiration for the basic Chinese communist dictatorship. Seeing this ideological bond, Beijing decided it had a friend and wanted to help the PM get elected and interfered in 2 successive elections. Poilievre also said, we know that the PM has been aware of many of the facts for a very long time and yet chose to do nothing. Mr. Cooper in this committee also said the invitation of a briefing is a blatant trap to muzzle Poilievre under national securities law. So the truth is now a trap, apparently. In the long list of baseless and absurd claims that the Conservative Party is making, the latest is on their website. It says Trudeau's fake rapporteur continues interference cover-up. I would submit that to this committee and to you that these are not just harmless exaggerations or isolated instances of partisan hyperbole. They are intentional and inflammatory. They're baseless allegations, and they're harmful and false. And they erode the trust in our democracy, and they're stoking anti-government sentiments for political gain. In your first report, Mr. Johnston, you've said that you've incorporated a wide range of sources, including the proceedings of this committee, into it. And you noted that at times members of this committee have asked insightful questions, and you've also referred to the element of political theater. Do you think this debate and the importance of providing answers to the Canadian public is well served when the political theater element drowns out the probative fact-finding work that we are all called upon to do?
Madam Chair, I would encourage the members of the committee to read the report that we have prepared and focus our attention on the real danger we have here, which is clear, present, pervasive foreign interference in our elections. In our report, we've tried to avoid the discussions of partisan kind that you referred to follow the facts, apply the law thoroughly, thoughtfully. And I would urge us to get on with this important matter of foreign interference that does require immediate attention by this body and the institutions of Parliament to protect our national security and protect our citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. It seems to me that based on our conversations in this committee that there are some members that are participating in these debates and proceedings that want to get to the facts and the matter at hand, and there are others that painfully are avoiding the facts and don't seem to want to talk about them. Mr. Johnston, it's clear to me that the Conservatives sang your praises and extolled your virtues for over a decade. In fact, Pierre Poilievre himself in 2007 said, I think about you and your appointment to the Mulroney-Schreiber inquiry, I think we're, so quote, I think we're dealing with a very credible individual, and I think that that distant history bears little relevance to the fact that he has a very distinguished career. If we're suggesting just because at some point in history he was appointed by a Conservative PM that he should be disqualified from participating in public life, I think that is a little bit extreme. This is a very qualified individual, and frankly, I haven't heard anybody question his integrity, and I have not reason to do so. End of quote. So, Mr. Johnston, why do you think Mr. Poilievre has changed his mind from 2007 until now?
Madam Chair, I think my focus throughout this has been on dealing with the facts of foreign interference, trying to apply the law, and putting before you as comprehensive and as thoughtful a report that we possibly could do. knowing it will be reviewed by NSICOP and NSERA, and I hope with the participation of the leaders of the three major parties, and I thank Mr. Singh for agreeing to be one of those, and review what it is we're about. So quite apart from changes of positions by people on whether my integrity evaporated 3 or 4 years ago for some reason with a change of government, I'm anxious that we get to the real issue here, which is foreign interference. Let's look at this report with our recommendations. Let's review it. And let's move with urgency on dealing with a problem which is very, very serious and is affecting not simply our national security, but our citizens in very direct and immediate and difficult ways.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. And it seems to me that the Conservatives seem to claim that you suddenly betrayed your character, that you built up this character over many years that they said was credible, had high integrity, and that all of a sudden you just abandoned your principles and integrity when you were appointed by PM Trudeau for this particular position, which to me is utterly absurd. The best predictor of past behavior or of future behavior is past behavior. And you've built your character over time to be an honorable person that has integrity and is credible. You've been, many people have said that about you over many years. And yet here we are. Now, why? I ask myself, why is it that they're so intent on attacking your character? And the only thing I can come up with is they don't like the conclusions of your report. The conclusions of your report, and the main one that I think that they're scared for anyone to report or talk about, is the main finding that you said, and I quote you in your report on page 2, I have not found examples of ministers, the Prime Minister, or their offices knowingly ignoring intelligence, advice, or recommendations on foreign interference, or being driven by partisan consideration in dealing with these issues. And yet, we still often hear and see claims to the contrary, with facts often distorted and misconstrued and misrepresented. We see and hear that in the parliamentary setting and outside of the parliamentary setting, that sort of rhetoric, those claims that are being made without evidence, the often bad faith mischaracterizations, does this kind of activity itself do damage to our democracy, in your view?
Madam Chair, I would say several things. One is the whole review and the work that you're engaged in is to build trust in our democracy and reinforce it when it is imperiled by foreign interference. In the quote you just made, we continued on to say that in our review we found very serious shortcomings in our systems of dealing with foreign interference that require very substantial review, improvement, and the responsibilities of this committee and other agencies of Parliament to do exactly that. Foreign interference has been growing like this, and our ability to adapt has been growing like that. We have to close that gap. But that's the work of Parliament, to get at the facts, to come up with the recommendations and improvements using the precedents from other jurisdictions, especially the Five Eyes, who've had to deal with this for longer periods of time, more difficult threats. In their case, now very much present in our home. Our job is to look forward and to determine how we can do a much better job of putting together a system that deals with foreign interference in a constructive and very protective way for Canadian interests.
Well, I agree completely that it would be nice if other parties would contribute to those discussions in a constructive manner, operating based on the facts. But what we've seen is you've built in validation for your findings, but members of opposition parties are not willing to actually review the annex to your report. Is this what you meant in your report by operating behind a veil of ignorance?
Madam Chair, in our report, we have presented what we can do publicly, paying full respect to the classified information that we were able to receive. And we have prepared an annex to that report in which we go into detail on the classified information that permitted us to come to some of those conclusions. And that classified part, of course, will be with our report before the NSERA committee, the NSICOP committees, to be reviewed and corrected. But it means getting on with the job. Parliament doing its work, which is to deal with this danger of foreign interference in our elections in a constructive and a thoughtful way.
Thank you. Okay. Donc, on va continuer avec Monsieur.
So So we'll continue with Mr. Terrien. There's 3 minutes that remain before the voting period begins. We'll take the 10 minutes with Mr. Terrien, and then we'll have a break so that everyone can vote. So, Mr. Johnston, in the 2 official languages, the time that it takes for interpretation will not be taken away from Mr. Terrien's time. So take the time to listen to the question and comments, and then you can answer with the time that you need as well. So, Mr. Terrien, over to you. Thank you, and good morning to Mr. Johnston and colleagues. Thank you for being with us today. As far as possible, we're trying to defend democracy, which is being very much attacked by foreign interference. So it's extremely important what we're doing. When I go door to door and I meet with people, and I'm sure you all do the same thing, there's people that say to you, I'm not sure whether I'm going to go and vote, and I encourage them to do so. Say it's important to make a choice. It's important to vote and get involved, because it's your choice that can decide on the colour of the government and the policies that will be adopted. So there's more and more abstention, and we're trying to fight against this type of abstention. Unfortunately, when we see these foreign interference threats, people's trust in democracy and in our institutions, and it's this lowering of trust which can lead people to say, okay, the dice is already cast, why should I vote? It seems that foreigners are deciding for us. So it can take on significant proportions. So we have to protect this trust, and we have to protect our institutions. When the population says to us through polls that it's 72%, according to the Léger poll, 72% of people want to have a public inquiry that's independent, because this is a serious threat and we need to shed light on this, and people think it's the only way to do this. Experts, several experts, and I could give you a whole list of experts, many experts that are specialised in this area, say that there has to be an independent public inquiry held. And the House, by majority, has stated that we have to have a public inquiry that's also an independent public inquiry. And when I read Mr. Johnson's report, he's actually dismissed that possibility. So I'd like to know why he has dismissed the possibility of holding an independent public inquiry that's been called for by so many people.
Madam Chair, first of all, I warmly reinforce the comments that has just been made with respect to people losing interest in and understanding about democracy, and that we must work very hard to build that trust. I would also say that what we're seeing around the world is a diminishing trust in democracies all over. As people move away from the rule of law, which is so important here, and move to the law of rule, strong people, autocratic governments come into place. That's the danger we face. With respect to the question of public inquiry, we thought long and hard about this. The dilemma is that we're dealing with classified information, and it is not possible to discuss classified information in public, nor to report it in your reports. So, and this has been apparent in other inquiries that have had to deal with this difficult matter. What we have done is to say, having dealt as best we can with classified information on the questions of responsibility within the government for dealing with foreign interference, that we have very serious shortcomings, and will proceed in the second phase of our mandate, the next 5 months, to deal with those issues in public hearings, inviting the public to come in and participate, with experts to do so, and to put a focus on the urgency of getting on with this, and to begin with public hearings with diaspora communities whose voices have been explaining these concerns to us, but without adequate protection and response up to now. And in the balance of our work, we hope to address that and a number of other issues that will place a very strong focus on the urgency of dealing with foreign interference and encouraging and strengthening our parliamentary institutions to develop the appropriate reforms and put them into place, and then see that they operate in a way that does, in fact, build trust in our democracy.
Well, Madam Chair, there are precedents which mean that we can have independent public inquiries held, even if these are very tricky, sensitive subjects. where there can be problems related to the security of certain persons. And that's why in these public inquiries that there was in-camera sessions for some of these matters, but the public independent inquiry is the best way to shed light on this matter. For example, if we look at the 3 secret services that were involved in the public inquiry, and we were able to proceed with an independent public inquiry. The same thing for the Air India attack. There are precedents that exist for this type of public inquiry, and in full respect to Mr. Johnston, when he says to me that we've discussed this and we considered that there were certain elements that would prevent us from holding a public inquiry, I would respond to him and I'd like to hear from him. I'd like to say that this has already happened, and I push it even further. For example, Dan Stanton, who was in the CSIS, and he knows what he's talking about. And is he incorrect when he said that we cannot have a public inquiry? Because Mr. Stanton has said foreign interference is one of the intelligence issues that's easiest to explore within the framework of a public inquiry. So I'd like to hear from you on what Mr. Stanton has said and on previous experiences which have shown that a public inquiry is possible.
Madam Chair, the issue of public inquiries are important, and what we realize is that when you're dealing with classified information, it becomes very difficult. It has been possible in other reviews to have sessions that don't deal with classified information and has shined the light of day on those. And that's what we intend to do with the public hearings regarding the reforms in our system that are most important. When Justice O'Connor finished the Arar inquiry, his comments was that public inquiries on the Public Inquiries Act are very difficult tools to use for something whose job is to shed light on situations, particularly situations of negligent responsibility and so on, because they are led by lawyers with cross-examination. They have difficulty getting at information that is classified, can't do that in public, are very expensive, are very time-consuming, and often do not result in providing the light. What we have hoped to do, of course, in the 5 remaining months of our mandate is to do exactly that, to have public hearings on matters that are not part of the classified information. And I think we may recall an earlier inquiry was the MacDonald Commission that led into the creation of the CSIS Act to take over the responsibilities for foreign interference from the RCMP. That commission was 5 years in its work to completion.
Madam Chair, I'm rather blown away there when we say that independent public inquiry can be costly. What is the price tag on democracy? What is the value of democracy? We're here. We've got 2 parties that are neck and neck in the polls where certain ridings can decide on the colour of the government. And now I'm being told that it can be costly to shed light on this because people, of course, agree upon the fact that the only way in which we can shed light on this situation is by holding an independent public inquiry. Yes, it can take time, but we can live for a long time in the darkness if we don't do anything. And that's not a better approach. So when Mr. Johnston, full respect, of course, for Mr. Johnston, but when he says to me that there are certain elements that are classified that we cannot bring out into the daylight, would that be worse where we had 3 secret services involved in the Aurora inquiry that were actually involved in this inquiry? So why would it be worse this time compared to what we had with the Aurora case inquiry?
Chair, certainly with respect to the public hearings we have in mind, it will be possible to invite representatives of CSIS and other experts, both government and non-government, to comment on this. With respect to costly, the costly I think I wanted to emphasize was the costliness in terms of the time that is wasted in getting at the real issues of how we address foreign interference and come up with the reforms, the changes, the improvements, and the careful oversight of our operations to be sure that we're doing a much better job than we're doing at the present time on something that is a very serious and not fully recognized danger to our democratic society in Canada.
Est-ce qu'on peut voter maintenant?
Can we now vote, Madam Chair? I've cut off my time.
On va faire une
Ça vous va? Oui, merci.
Yes, we're going to have a break
All right,
now,
we're
and then
listening
we'll
to
return
testimony from former Governor General David Johnston. The committee of members of Parliament asking those questions of Mr. Johnston is just going to take a short break as the MPs actually conduct votes via an app on other matters that are taking place in the House of Commons. But this testimony is scheduled to go all the way until 1 o'clock Eastern. To break down what we've heard so far, I'm joined by CTV News' senior political correspondent, Glenn McGregor. Glenn, we were anticipating and sort of thinking about what tone opposition MPs in particular would take in their questioning of Mr. Johnston. Things kind of settled down in the last few minutes there, but certainly the beginning of the questioning was not in any way kind of slow or holding back in any way. It was a big tete-a-tete.
Very aggressive questioning by two Conservative MPs, Larry Brock and Michael Barrett, about David Johnston's connection to the Trudeau family. He tried to answer those questions, but was repeatedly cut off by the MPs who were asking the questions. They were trying to ask yes or no questions about, did you say this on this date? Johnston obviously wanted to talk about that relationship, how he knew the Trudeau children because they were the same age as his daughters, and they skied together at Mont Tremblant something like 40 years ago. And then Johnston, we did hear him say that he hasn't really had any contact with the Prime Minister in the ensuing 40 years until they became briefly neighbors living together at Rideau Hall when Johnston was still Governor General. And Trudeau, of course, and his family moved in 2015 after he became Prime Minister instead of living at 24 Sussex. But I think at the end there, we got some more a little more of the substance of the issue with questioning from the Bloc MP, Alain Terrien, asking about why not have a public inquiry.
Which is kind of the big question for Mr. Johnston, right? Because he's made the recommendation not to, and the government says, okay, well, he's recommended not to, so we won't.
And Terrien pointing out some of the past public inquiries that have been held in Canada that did have to address this issue about privacy and security of information, confidential information that was gathered by intelligence agencies. He talked about the Air India public inquiry, the inquiry into Mahar Arar, who was extradited or sent back to the Middle East on allegations that turned out to be false, that he was a terrorist. And Johnston talked about, well, but you don't need to do that in this case because this is an issue for Parliament. We know that foreign interference is a rising problem. It's up to you, to MPs, parliamentarians, to gather as much information as you can about this and presumably make some changes to legislation that would better address it. And he also said the public inquiry could be very long. He cited the case of the McDonald inquiry into the RCMP, which ultimately led to the creation of CSIS. He pointed out that went on for 5 years. So saying this would be a very long process. The route he's proposing, public hearings, he argued, would be a better way to do.
Yeah, very interesting stuff that didn't come out in his report, so we are learning a bit new. I'm going to head back to the committee because I believe they've resumed after that vote. Let's take a listen in live.
Parce que je trouve ça important.
Madam Chair, that's a really important question of when information moves into the sphere of evidence and when it's classified or not classified. It's one of the issues that we hope to address in depth in the public hearings that will be held over the next 5 months, of whether we have the right connection, the right balance in determining what must be kept secret and what can be put into the open situation. And we have experience from other jurisdictions who've dealt with this very particular problem. It seems to me that we can learn from those experiences and try to find a better balance of what must be classified to protect our people that are working and also our Five Eye allies.
Juste vous dire, Monsieur Johnston, que c'est très important ce que vous nous avez dit, c'est que vous me dites dans la réponse qu'on ne sait pas pourquoi on ne peut pas avoir une enquête publique indépendante. C'est ce que j'ai entendu, là. Vous avez dit que ça prend quelques mois pour voir la différence puis l'importance de la classification. Donc, vous n'êtes même pas prête à me dire aujourd'hui qu'on n'a pas besoin
So you're not even prepared to say that we're not going to have an independent public inquiry. It's going to take you a few months to reach that conclusion.
Non, c'est juste que je voulais conclure.
I just wanted to conclude because it's extremely important what Mr. Johnston just said. Well, we'll continue with Mr. Singh. 10 minutes.
Madam Chair, and Madam Chair, through you, I would like to thank Mr. Johnston. Thank you for appearing today. And thank you for appearing to discuss the report. I want to lay out just a couple of opening statements, just so it's clear. You've also addressed the question, but I want to make it clear as well. I've made it clear that I disagree with your finding that there should not be a public inquiry. I believe there should be a public inquiry. And I think that is the only way to really restore public trust and confidence in our electoral system. And last week, we passed a resolution in the House, and you alluded to it, but I also want to say that we recommended that you step down as special rapporteur for the very specific reason, given the appearance of bias. And I made one concrete example, that it is, to a reasonable person, it would seem that there's a clear appearance of bias. The fact that the lead counsel repeatedly donated to the Liberal Party and attended a fundraiser with the Prime Minister as late as 2021, that this appearance of bias to a reasonable person would undermine the work that you're hoping to do, and that work cannot be achieved because of the appearance of bias, which is so fundamental. I am also disappointed that you rejected the majority vote, that the will of the House was expressed, and you rejected that vote. I think that's disappointing. But I want to use my time to talk about some of the details of the report. And I'll turn to my first question through you, Madam Chair. My first question is in relation to a question that I asked the Prime Minister on May 9th. I asked a question in question period about the impact of foreign interference on the diaspora, which you alluded to in the public hearings, will be a major part of your public hearings. I asked a question to the Prime Minister about the impact on diaspora communities of foreign interference. And in response, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "The diaspora, whether the Canadian, the Chinese Canadian, the Iranian Canadian, the Russian Canadian, or the Indo-Canadian communities are often the first communities to be targeted by foreign interference." And in fact, the National Security and Intelligence Advisor, Jody Turner, also highlighted that foreign interference, particularly from India, has an impact on Canadians, especially the Sikh community. And many people from diaspora communities will tell you, though they left communities of oppressive regimes, they come to Canada hoping for security, liberty, and safety, only to be pursued by that same interference. And in the Sikh community, many people will share stories of being denied visas or their communities being threatened, their family members being threatened for raising concerns about the human rights track record of India, for example. Given that that is well known that this exists, and particularly the Prime Minister has expressed that it exists, that these threats exist to diaspora communities, how do you expect that people from diaspora communities, knowing that they are already targeted, knowing that they're already at the risk of personally being targeted or their families being targeted, how would someone from a diaspora community have any sort of confidence to attend a public hearing, given the threats to themselves, to their community, and potential backlash and repercussions to their family? And how would they have the confidence that they could show up to a public hearing? How would that process work for them? And are there any steps being taken to protect their security and their concerns that they have?
Thank you for those questions, which are really vital, important, and require very thoughtful attention. You're quite right. The diaspora communities have been beset with interference, with disturbance of their tranquility, with their own safety and their well-being in ways that are just unconscionable. And it behooves all of us to see this as a very serious threat in our community, where pluralism and respect for one's cultural heritage are very important values to us. And it's been neglected far too long. I look at Mr. Chong over here, who's led the chair of the Canada Relations Committee, for example, reams and reams of testimony from diaspora communities about this particular matter. And we have not done the kind of things that we should do. And we must do, because it is real, it is damaging, and it is simply unacceptable for Canadian citizens. What we hope to do in the balance of the 5 months is to put a real light on this issue of the threats that diaspora communities are under, and develop much more effective ways of, one, equipping ourselves with our intelligence agencies to deal with them more effectively than them, and secondly, acquainting Canadians to the fact that so many people in the diaspora communities are unwitting victims of something that lies far beyond them, and that we as Canadians have a responsibility to protect them, to embrace them, to say this is not acceptable and we'll not sit here and let it stand, and to recognize that that's happening to these communities and take adequate steps in terms of our governmental protections to see it. And in the last month or so, we have seen a step forward in at least trying to provide better understanding and warnings to members of Parliament, others who've been subjected, whose families have been subjected to these things. That too requires very important remedies.
Thank you. Again, through you, Madam Chair, I'm hoping you'll also address like how those families will feel safe to come forward, or how those individuals will feel safe to come forward. But my second question I want to touch on, you identified the serious shortcomings in communication between security agencies and the government. And you made it clear that there were no examples where the Prime Minister, ministers, or their office knowingly or negligently failed to act on intelligence, advice, or recommendations. So it's conceivable that in your report that the ministers or Prime Minister was not properly informed. But you also recognize in your conclusion that it is very clear that foreign governments are absolutely or undoubtedly attempting to interfere in our democracy, and that this is something that's been well known. Given how clear it is that there is foreign interference going on, and that the government ought to have known that, generally speaking, there's foreign interference going on, my question is about the utter lack of curiosity of this government, that despite clear and credible evidence of foreign interference, that in your investigation, at no point in time did the Prime Minister or ministers ever actively or proactively ask CSIS or other security agencies whether or not members of Parliament were being targeted? Was there never an attempt to proactively assess threats to members of Parliament? While you accept that they were not maybe advised of this from CSIS, did they never have that curiosity to say, well, if we know that there's foreign interference going on, maybe it's impacting our members of Parliament? Was there never any evidence of that curiosity, interest in following up?
Madam Chair, thank you for both questions and repeating the one that I'll answer very shortly, but I hope helpfully with respect to would we expect members of the diaspora community to be able to appear before a public hearing in openness. I'm quite confident they will in many instances, and instances where they do not want to be there, we would receive submissions. We've already received perhaps a half a dozen or so submissions from diaspora communities, very painfully and eloquently setting out the burdens that they're bearing and crying out for help. In cases of people who feel they can't come and see in person, we would invite and encourage whatever information they can give us, and in particular what steps we can take. Now let's come to the question of curiosity and dealing with those foreign threats. In our report, as you know, we've been quite critical of shortcomings of the government, and indicating that we have been slow to react, slow to anticipate in many instances, and those must be changed. But they'll be changed with the work of this committee and other parliamentary committees. NCCOP and CIRA, one in place since 2017, the other 2019, are review and oversight committees. That's the kind of responsibility that are our agencies working properly or not. And we must bolster that kind of thing. And so I'm in quite agreement that we have not had the kind of curiosity and particularly the flow of information so it can be acted upon that we need.
I appreciate that.
And I hope we can address that.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. And finally, through the chair to you, Mr. Johnston, I want to point out a particularly concerning different conclusion that you arrived at in comparison to Mr. O'Toole. And I want to highlight Mr. O'Toole raised a question of privilege, and he indicated, and I just want to quote a portion of what he said with my time remaining, that the briefing he received from CSIS confirmed to me, this is Mr. O'Toole, what I suspected for quite some time, that my party, several members of my caucus, and I were targets of misinformation and voter suppression, and that was orchestrated by China before and during the 2021 election. So members of the Conservative caucus and himself were targeted. In your report, you find that you, in reference to Mr. Chu, who was, of course, a member of the Conservative Party and a candidate in the 2021 election, that misinformation could not be traced to a state-sponsored source. So we've got two very different conclusions from a CSIS briefing that Mr. O'Toole is referring to, and then you're stating in your report that there was no clear evidence that it was state-sponsored. How could you have such different conclusions from what Mr. O'Toole received?
Well, again, Madam Chair, I appreciate that particular question, and I've asked to be brief. We did have an opportunity to meet with Mr. O'Toole shortly before our report was completed and did take into consideration what he had to say to us. And I must say he has been a very knowledgeable, thoughtful person about this and has much more to contribute. The evidence that we had before us that permitted us to come to the conclusion you've suggested was what was available to us at that time. I think since that time, conversations that Mr. O'Toole has had with the director of CSIS, I think there's been a much greater step in terms of what should have been done and what must be done in the future.
Thank you. Maintenant, Monsieur Berthold, 5 minutes.
And now Mr. Berthold for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Johnston. Mr. Johnston, I was quite shocked in your opening comments when you said the comments on your integrity are false, and the fact that we repeat them doesn't make them true. I think that this statement alone puts you in a situation of a conflict of interest, in particular towards the leaders of the opposition. Mr. Johnston, you were Governor-General of Canada, so you could not exercise any political role, but you still have a pay as former Governor-General. Is that correct?
Could you repeat the question, Madam Chair? Have what as a pay as the former Governor-General?
Do you continue to receive pay as former Governor-General? You still receive payment?
Madam Chair, I don't receive any payment as former Governor-General. I have a pension as a public servant, and that is the pay. And there's...
Merci.
Thank you. You were a member of the Trudeau Foundation for how many years?
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. I joined the association of the Trudeau Foundation. That's like a shareholder at a general meeting, not a member of the board of directors, not involved in any decision making.
C'est pas la question, Monsieur.
That's not the question.
To vote in the board to approve the financial statements, no involvement in fundraising of that kind. And I resigned. That was 2018, and I resigned in March of this year when I was appointed to this role.
You have declared in an interview in 2016 talking about relationship with the family of the Prime Minister that you got to know the children, and our friendship was built on exchanges amongst children. Do you remember these statements?
Madam Chair, I do recall referring to the fact that my own children and Mr. Trudeau, as a young boy, did have opportunities to ski together 4 or 5 times. Between that time and until he became Prime Minister, I had no meetings with Mr. Trudeau, and our children, to my knowledge, did not. And when they became neighbors to us at Rideau Hall, I think I referred to it, the fact that it would be very nice for our grandchildren to have a chance to play with his children. And that didn't occur, I don't think, on any occasions, but it still would have been a pleasant experience for us.
Monsieur Johnston.
Mr. Johnston, I'd like to ask you to be briefer in your answers because I'm trying to go through several points and I want to be respectful and give you time to respond, but I've got very precise questions. When you were the president of University of Waterloo, you went to Chongqing and you met President Xi Jinping and you said it's wonderful to be back in China. It feels as if I've gone back home. Is that exact?
Madam Chair, if I understand the question correctly, it was wonderful to be back home. I think that was Mr. Trudeau going back to 24 Sussex Drive, and that was not available. The Secretary to the Office of Governor-General very gallantly said he would be happy to vacate Rideau Cottage, and that's why Mr. Trudeau's family moved in there.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, perhaps there are problems in terms of interpretation because the answers are not matching up with the questions that I've been putting from the outset. So I'd like to ask you to show some intelligence. I'll try and talk slowly. It seems that Mr. Johnston is not answering my questions due to the interpretation. Mr. Johnston, you asked Mr. Jacobi, a former mentor of the Trudeau Foundation, to give his opinion on possible conflict of interest when you were becoming the Special Rapporteur. Is that correct that you turned to him? And you turned to Ms. Sheila Bloch, who is a big supporter of the Liberal Party, to be your main advisor in drafting the report. Is that true?
Madam Chair, it is true that Madam Block was my senior
Merci.
counsel with respect to the
Thank you.
inquiry, and I reached out to her to be the senior counsel for this review as well.
I have lots of other statements that you have defined as false, Mr. Johnson, but unfortunately I don't have much time because of problems of interpretation. You have written a book called Trust. I've got it here. There's no version in French, and in this book, and I'd like to cite from it, Madam Chair, that the worst leaders manipulate by not disclosing information or only disclose information that supports their opinions and decisions and actions. Do you remember writing that?
I do remember writing that chapter of this book, yes.
Monsieur Johnston,
Mr. Johnston, with all full respect, given your years of experience, having recognized the facts that I've listed, it seems there's not one single thing you think that would have an appearance of a conflict of interest for someone who has to present an independent report on the foreign interference of Beijing in our elections that would have favored the Liberal Party. Do you sincerely think that with all of this, there is nothing that could give the appearance that there's a conflict of interest? And do you think that Canadians should just believe you on your word?
Well, Madam Chair, to answer the question, I don't believe I have a conflict of interest, and I would not have undertaken this responsibility had I had a conflict of interest. What I would say is that for 55 years, I've served on advisory committees, perhaps on 2 to 3 dozen times, because of my nonpartisanship and integrity. And this is the first time that's ever been called into question or a suggestion that I have a conflict of interest. So my suggestion, Madam Chair, is that one looks at a record of service and comes to one's conclusion about conflict of interest. And I would, again, plea that you focus the attention on foreign interference, this report, which will be reviewed, and others where we must do a much better job of getting on with the important matter.
Ms. O'Connell, 5 minutes to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Johnston, for being here today. And actually, where you just left off, I think is part of where I want to go with some of my questions. I will, before I get to that question, though, Madam Chair, just want to point out that the Conservatives just had a total of 15 minutes worth of questions, and they didn't ask a single question about foreign interference. Not a single question. Madam Chair, it was nothing more than a character assassination or conspiracy theories around children playing together. So, Mr. Johnston, your opening comments about how serious and pervasive this issue is, I find it incredibly frustrating and disappointing that 15 minutes worth of questioning time from the official opposition consisted of 0 questions on foreign interference. But what has already happened, and Mr. Johnston, you wouldn't know this, is Conservative members, Mr. Barrett has already posted clips, I'm sure to help fundraise or stoke fears and conspiracy theories around your nonpartisanship. Sorry, Madam Chair, through the witness's nonpartisanship. Some of the questions by Mr. PROC earlier was bringing up things about, again, referring to children playing together, your grandchildren playing with the current Prime Minister's children. That's what they think is the smoking gun here, children playing together. And I point out that, Mr. Johnston, in some of the responses that you were providing, even though the Conservatives wanted you here and opposition wanted you here for 3 hours, yet didn't want you to answer a single question, I find that very telling. And again, they got their clips. That's what this is really about. This isn't about foreign interference and protecting our democracy, because if it was, you know, they'd ask a serious question instead of playing partisan games. But they mentioned, Mr. PROC mentioned a time period when you mentioned the current Prime Minister was 11 years old. Yet since then, my colleague pointed out, Mr. Turnbull, that actually the leader of the opposition, Mr. Poilievre, actually since that time where you had spent time with the current Prime Minister, 11 years old, Mr. Poilievre defended your reputation. we can't find anything that has changed in your conduct or behavior. So all I can conclude, Madam Chair, is that the opposition they're not serious about foreign interference. They're not serious about preserving democracy. They're just looking for partisan attacks. And even Mr. Johnston, you pointed out that some of the same people you use for the Mulrooney-Schreiber inquiry are some of the same individuals you've used to help you or assist in this writing, yet Conservatives are conveniently neglecting that point. So getting to the actual issues around foreign interference, because I think we owe Canadians to be serious about this, and we can leave the partisan games to the Conservatives because Canadians will judge them on that. Following up actually on some of Mr. Singh's questions with Mr. O'Toole, and we heard testimony in this committee from Mr. Chu. I actually asked him at the time if he could table any of the evidence he had or examples that he had been concerned about, and he said he never saved any of that information. Was there anything, did the Conservative Party provide any information? They talked about, Mr. O'Toole talked about a dossier. The Conservative Party also in 2022 did an internal review into the 2021 election results. Was any of this information provided in the package that you would have received and reviewed?
Madam Chair, through you, could you be more specific about that package? I just don't have a context for it.
Sure. Mr. Singh had commented on some public reporting from Mr. O'Toole, and he spoke about that there was a dossier that the Conservative Party had about some of the WeChat information. Mr. Chu demonstrated that there was all this evidence submitted to him, but he no longer saved it or something along those lines. And then in January 2022, the Conservative Party received the results of an internal review that they did, led by James Cummings. Did you receive any of that documentation in your review?
Madam Chair, I want to be careful in my answer because I don't have a specific recollection of receiving those specific documents. What I do have is we asked Mr. Poilievre on 4 different occasions to make submissions if he could and meet with us, and he chose not to. I think 2 or 3 days before our report was published, we had a package of documents which were largely reports from newspapers and other media reports. I don't recall the specific document you mentioned.
Thank you. Monsieur Terrien.
Mr. Terrien for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go with brief questions, and I hope we'll have brief answers. I don't want to put pressure on you. It's just because I have 2.5 minutes. Mr. Johnson, re-establishing, restoring public confidence is very important, of course. That is the aim of this approach, amongst other things. How can we restore public confidence? Independent public inquiry or no independent public inquiry?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Clearly, that is our job of restoring confidence. In the balance of our report and our work for the next 5 months, we hope to devote ourselves to having as much light as possible as you can on the key issue, and that is, how is our system of dealing with foreign interference working? In the report that you've read, not at all well, needs significant improvement. Through those public hearings and hearing from experts and others, and with your help as the review committee, continuing your work, I hope we can treat this with the urgency it deserves and stand proud before Canadians to saying we are doing everything in our power to protect them.
The message that I'm hearing, Madam Chair, is that I'm going to shed light. Don't worry, I'm there for that. But the problem is a simple one. There were people before David Johnston came out with his report that were against a public inquiry, certain experts, and after his report came out, they became in favour of a public inquiry. Does that mean that this attempt to shed light very quickly and at a low cost has perhaps been a failure because we've got Mr. Stanton here from the CSIS, Michael Wernick, Artwazinski. They have changed their minds after you came out with your report. Does that mean that finally there needs to be a report that's a public inquiry, because you've not convinced people? Instead, people have been convinced after your report came out that we actually do need to have an independent public inquiry.
Madam Chair, again, thank you for that question. We have set out the reasons why we think a classic Royal Commission public inquiry would not serve the process of rebuilding trust, but the public hearings that I mentioned will. And I come back to Justice O'Connor following the RR committee, who said that public inquiries in the traditional sense are not particularly useful and can be horrendous in dealing with these kind of things, and there are appropriate ways to deal with them, and that's what we hope to do in the next 5 months.
Merci. Madame Kwan.
Thank you. Madam Kwan, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Johnston. Global News reported that on February 8th, 2023, that national security officials warned Prime Minister Trudeau and his office more than a year before the 2019 federal election that Chinese agents were, quote, assisting Canadian candidates running for political offices, end quote. In Mr. Johnston's report, an early draft of the memo contained similar but not identical language was noted. The draft was significantly revised, according to the report, before the memo went to the Prime Minister. Did Mr. Johnston inquire who changed the memo and why it was changed?
Well, Madam Chair, thank you very much for this question. I want to go directly to our report, and there are two parts of my brain functioning here. One is the part that deals with classified information, and the other is the part that deals with open information, and it's important that I not cross that boundary. To deal specifically with the question that has just been raised, Madam Chair, on page 23 of our report, in dealing with these statements and conclusions in the press, the PRC interfered with the nomination of Han Dong as the Liberal Party candidate in Don Valley North. Global News, February 24. Irregularities were observed with Mr. Dong's nomination in 2019. There is well-grounded suspicion that the irregularities were tied to the PRC consulate in Toronto, with whom Mr. Dong maintains relationships. In reviewing the intelligence, I did not find evidence that Mr. Dong was aware of the irregularities or the PRC's consulate's potential involvement in his nomination. The Prime Minister was briefed about these irregularities, although no specific recommendation was provided. He concluded there was no basis to displace Mr. Dong as the candidate for Don Valley North. This was not an unreasonable conclusion based on the intelligence available.
Mr. Johnson, I know if you just reference where you would like us to note to, we'll take it just because time is limited. So I'm going to go back to Ms. Kwan.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I read the report several times over. Quoting it again, to me, is not going to answer that question. My question was, did Mr. Johnston look into who changed that memo and why it was changed?
Madam Chair, again, I must be conscious of the classified information. The memo that appeared in Global News.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for a second here, Madam Chair. It's a yes or no question. Did Mr. Johnston look into who changed it? Yes or no?
The answer to that question is the memo that was referred to in the Global News report was an early draft that had certain statements. The draft was not circulated further. There was a final draft that completed to quite a different conclusion of what transpired.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just finish my thought, then I take that to mean that Mr. Johnston did not ask the question who changed it and why it was changed.
Madam Chair, again, let me...
So I'm not going to comment, but I think, Mr. Johnson, your comment does stand for as to what your response is. How people receive the information is not the debate today, but the focus is on foreign election interference. And I'm going to continue because we're going to go to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes, followed by Mr. Fergus, 5 minutes. Et puis on va prendre
5 minutes with Mr. Fergus, and then we will have a break.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Johnston, for appearing. You've made several mentions during this hearing today about the need for Parliament to do its work You've said it's the work of Parliament to help counter what you call the ever-increasing threat of foreign interference. You've pled with us, made pleas to us to focus on the issue of foreign interference. Our job here is to hold the government accountable. It's set up in the opening clauses of the Constitution Act 1867. Section 18 gives us immense powers to do that. The problem is Parliament has not been able to do its work because our hands have been tied by the government. We haven't been able to get the answers we are seeking to questions concerning the PRC's foreign interference in Canada. Government documents aren't released that are requested, and when they are, they're often so heavily redacted that they make little sense. Government witnesses aren't forthcoming with answers to our questions. And not only are we not able to do our work because of that, the government is deliberately bypassing Parliament through the very entities that you've referenced in your report and in your testimony, NSICOP and CIRA, and even with respect, sir, your position, all of these entities are appointed by the government. They're appointments of the Prime Minister and serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. And so we've been unable to do our work. It's been incredibly frustrating. Over the last 4 years, we've spent a lot of time and effort holding hearings on foreign interference. We've had 4 committees of this House examine the matter, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Subcommittee on International Human Rights, the Canada-China Committee, and this committee, the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. And by my count, these 4 committees alone have held 70 meetings where PRC foreign interference was examined, heard from 364 witnesses, received 152 hours of testimony consisting of 1,902 pages of evidence, resulting in 5 reports with 31 specific recommendations relating to foreign interference. But despite all this work, we still haven't gotten the answers we sought from the government. And with respect, neither will you, because in your first report, you've indicated that your upcoming hearings will not be focusing on who knew what and when, and that the focus will not be on looking at government records and speaking to government personnel. So if Parliament hasn't been able to get the answers over the last 4 years, and you're not going to seek the answers in your upcoming hearings, and we're not getting a public inquiry with all the powers of subpoena, all the powers to call witnesses and to gather evidence, then how on earth are we to get the answers we need to play our constitutional role and hold this government accountable?
Madam Chair, thank you for those questions. And I should say that my counsel and I spent a very profitable hour and a half or 2 hours with Mr. Chong going through some of these things and benefiting enormously from the work that he himself has done on this matter and other matters. First of all, NSICOP and NSIRA, assisted by leaders of the 3 major parties, I hope, will have an opportunity to review our report, review our conclusions, and find out if there's fault in us not assessing responsibility where it lies. With respect to the question of the inability of Parliament to move government, we will be looking very carefully at the oversight bodies, in particular NSIRA, which has been in place since 2019, and NSICOP, which has been in place since 2019. And I would be very surprised if, given the expert testimony we'll have from foreign intelligence experts and advice that we get from you, Mr. Chong, which we will very much welcome, including what you've said has been done over 4 years, of having a much more strengthened, robust role of those 2 committees to provide proper oversight and ensure that the operations of our foreign interference oversight is much more effective than it is at the present time.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Johnston. I'd like to also follow up and ask you a question about how you can restore public trust and confidence in our institutions. 8 months ago, when this foreign interference scandal first blew wide open, reasonable people could have argued that public trust could be restored without an independent public inquiry. But that door closed a long time ago. The House of Commons, 3 times in the last 3 months, has voted for an independent public inquiry. The majority of Canadians in polling want a public inquiry. You, however, have recommended against a public inquiry. Do you not see how recommending against a public inquiry undermines confidence in our democratic institutions?
Thank you again for that question, Mr. Chong. What we have recommended and what we intend to do in the next 5 months is to have public hearings on these very important questions of, are our systems adequate? They are not. How do we improve them in very substantial measures? And to focus on that as a really important matter of Parliament and our agencies and for the public generally to ensure that we do a much better job than we have at the present time.
Thank you. Mr. Fergus?
Johnson, for coming to committee today, and thank you for your report as independent special rapporteur, as well as for your your lifetime of service to our country in many roles. Mr. Johnson, you noted in your report a series of structural issues in the way information is shared by our security agencies. Can you please expand on that, and what could be, an initial view, possible solutions?
Madam Chair, through you, in the last pages of a report, we refer to issues for review in the public stage of the work. And in particular, we speak about amendments to the CSIS Act that might assist in fighting foreign interference, the role and structure of NSICOP and whether it be integrated, machinery of government issues, including processes for funneling intelligence to top officials, including greater accountability for ensuring that the right people see the right intelligence, including at the most senior service in political issues, tracking protocols so it is possible to reconstruct who sought what and when, clearer lines of responsibility for recommendations as to how to react to intelligence, a government-led process rather than an agency-led process for declassification of information to enhance transparency, and a case for a National Security Committee of Cabinet to put foreign interference in the context where it should be dealt with at the highest level and with a sense of urgency and importance.
I get you on that, and I'm looking perhaps for perhaps a little preview as to, or a sense as to, a further sense as to where you think we should be going. Because as you just quoted in your report, you did talk about the problem of information sharing that seems to be happening. And we also had testimony before this committee from the National Security and Intelligence Advisor, Jody Thomas, who also identified there were gaps in the process. We understand that she has already implemented a process to address those gaps. Is that also your understanding? And how do you think that this would be helpful?
That is my understanding, Madam Chair, that process has been initiated by the National Security Intelligence Advisor. It's a very welcome one, and I think there are very important reforms, initiatives, using the experience of other allies like the Five Eyes dealing with precisely these problems that we can take and put into effect. I think what we need is more encouragement with respect to our agencies to be proactive in suggesting those changes, and then ensuring that Parliament and committees like these understand that, say we can do better, and we are going to do everything in our possible to be sure that we do better quickly.
On that parliamentary aspect of it, we have the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. You wrote about them in your report. Do you feel that this is a good form that is for which documents can be reviewed by parliamentarians while ensuring that we maintain the classification system? And more importantly, is NSICOP, comparatively speaking to our Five Eye partners, does it have the right level of access?
Yeah. What's interesting, another one of the issues that is in this list of things to be reviewed in the next 4 or 5 months is whether NSICOP is properly constituted as the committee of the executive rather than a committee of parliament. NSICOP has a very fundamental role, as does NSIRA. We've had now 6 years experience with NSICOP. It's made some recommendations. I think there's much more that can be done with that to improve our system, and NSICOP and NSIRA and this oversight committee have very fundamental roles to play.
Are there ways that you're able to share with us before this committee in terms of questions that we should be looking at in terms of making NSICOP and NSIRA more functional?
I think in preparing for these public hearings, we'll try to list a series of questions and then invite experts from outside the government and some from within the government to provide their advice on just that.
Great. Mr. Johnston, also very quickly, you made some recommendations in terms of changes that should be made to the Canadian Security and Intelligence Act. Can you, this is something that we've also heard from other witnesses, can you expand on what type of changes you would like to see?
Madam Chair, the first observation to make is that act was passed in 2003, I believe, and has not been substantially amended since that time. It does call for a significant review. In fact, the Director of CSIS has called for that with some recommendations on a number of occasions. So it's another area where I think attention is urgent and should be done. I'm
going to just let you hold that thought because there was a nice pause in between, and I think that was a great exchange. And with that, bells are ringing, so we do have another vote. I'm going to ask committee members to take a 10-minute break. When we return, we will re-enter into 6-minute rounds. I believe we can get through 2 rounds, and then we can vote. Do we have agreement to do what we did for the first vote again? So we can vote by the app. I'll pause to make sure all votes have been registered, and then we'll continue to maximize our time together. Agreed. Excellent. We'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you so much. Suspending.
That's the chair of the committee, Bardish Chagger, calling a bit of a recess so that members of parliament sitting on that committee can go vote. They're going to take a 10-minute break. They are exactly halfway through 3 hours of testimony from former Governor General David Johnston. He also, of course, occupies the position of Special Rapporteur to the government on foreign interference. He spent a number of weeks investigating allegations of interference and ultimately concluded just a few weeks ago in a report he released that the government should not hold a public inquiry. The substance of many of the questions directed at him over the last 90 minutes was about that decision and what he plans to do instead. I want to bring in my colleague, CTV senior political correspondent Glenn McGregor, to unpack a little bit of what we heard. So since the last time we spoke, I think it was about 45 minutes ago, something like that, still some focus on allegations of sort of conflict of interest for Mr. Johnston, but a lot also on the substance of what he ultimately decided to recommend. I found some, particularly the exchange with Michael Chong, interesting, since Michael Chong, the Conservative MP, we know was targeted by the Chinese regime, him and his family, according to CSIS intelligence from back in 2021. A good exchange there on kind of how you can restore public faith at this juncture, so many months out from the initial allegations, without a public inquiry.
Yeah, I mean, throughout his testimony, Johnston has repeatedly kind of pleaded, I think he used that word at one point, pleading with MPs to address this core problem of foreign interference, which he says is getting worse, and there are really no tools that have been developed by Parliament to deal with this. Chong came back and said, well, we can't address this unless we know exactly what's going on. And that is why we need a public inquiry. We can't get the parliamentarians, MPs, can't get the answers they need unless they know exactly what is happening, unless they can understand where the breakdown is and in communication, because there's something that Johnston has raised, the information is not getting shared with parliamentarians by the various intelligence agencies, and they need to look at some of the cases in the past, including his own, to understand exactly where that breakdown occurred. Why did that information not get passed along from CSIS to the National Security Intelligence Advisor, Jody Thomas, and then on to potentially onto the Prime Minister or other members of his cabinet? That was a very illuminating exchange. Johnston, again, reiterating that this is something that's going to be addressed at these public hearings he has, which he says will solve the problem of discussing confidential information, classified information that couldn't be dealt with if they were to have a full public inquiry, because so much of that would have to be held in camera behind closed doors. I also thought a really interesting exchange between Johnston and Jagmeet Singh, who's appearing as kind of a special guest, not a special guest. MPs can substitute all the time, so he's substituting in for the Rachel Blaney, who's the normal NDP MP on this committee. And he asked Johnston about his finding in his report that, yes, it appeared that some Conservative MPs in the last election in the British Columbia's Lower Mainland were targeted with misinformation spread on WeChat. That is a kind of like the Chinese Facebook, Chinese language Facebook, that's very popular in the mainland Chinese community. And Johnston said he couldn't find any evidence that this was state-sponsored. This could have been just people, Chinese people who are interested in Canadian politics expressing their opinions on WeChat. But Singh said, well, what about the briefing that CSIS gave to Aaron O'Toole, Conservative leader, who said, no, in that election campaign, your MPs were targeted and they believed it was directed by the Chinese government to spread misinformation about Conservative candidates, in particular Kenny Chiu, who was running for re-election in Richmond. It was his riding in the Lower Mainland, and who lost and was the subject of misinformation or disinformation. And Johnston basically admitted, well, we got that information kind of late before a report came in. We talked to Mr. O'Toole a couple of days. He didn't have that information. That to me says, why not?
Yeah.
You know, why did CSIS give this information to Aaron O'Toole in a private briefing, but didn't give it to the guy, the special rapporteur, who's looking into this on behalf of the government, on behalf of Canadians? That to me was a real clang moment. That was like, wait a second, why is CSIS not sharing all the information with the special rapporteur that they have shared, obviously, with Aaron O'Toole?
Well, ultimately, what it does is also cast some more doubt on the conclusions that Mr. Johnston reached, which is that, based on the scope of the problem as I assess it, a public inquiry is not necessary. But now we're finding out that some pretty salient details, including, I mean, Aaron O'Toole is the former leader of the party. The election that he led the Conservatives during was the 2021 election, which is one of two that PROC, that the committee up there is actually investigating. The information that CSIS just recently conveyed to him, and also to Jenny Kwan, and also to Michael Chong, which is a consequence of the intelligence leaks to the Globe and Mail. Now they have a new directive to brief MPs on the threats against them. That stuff didn't make it to David Johnston.
Yeah, interesting about Aaron O'Toole. There's a school of thought among some Conservatives, some Chinese Conservatives, that his kind of bellicose rhetoric against what he repeatedly referred to as the Communist Party of China may have hurt the Conservatives in that election campaign in certain regions that have large mainland Chinese populations. Because the Canadian Chinese diaspora is kind of shifting and evolving. It used to be, the earliest Chinese immigrants who came to Canada were mostly from Hong Kong and also from Taiwan. And it's now shifting to more mainland China. And they have kind of different views about hearing Canadian politicians attacking what Pierre Poilievre likes to call Beijing, really means the Chinese government. And there's the thinking that some of the rhetoric that O'Toole used in that campaign was over the top, and it may have hurt his party with voters in those key ridings in North York, Toronto, as well as in the Lower Mainland. So interesting to see.
I think there was even an assessment by James Cumming, who kind of reviewed the Conservatives' performance there to that effect. Although I would say, like, his rhetoric is very similar to what we hear now from the U.S., for example, the hawkish nature.
Absolutely.
But it was an outlier at the time to a certain degree here in Canada.
And this is a little bit of a digression, but I mean the interesting point though is that Johnston didn't have this information about who was posting these messages, apparently, according to CSIS, via Aaron O'Toole, about Kenny Chiu, about other Conservative candidates. And I think a lot of it was focused on the possibility of a foreign agents registry, which is still being discussed by the government today.
Well, now they're going to pursue one.
Now they're going to pursue one, but the misinformation or disinformation that was being propagated on WeChat, whoever posted it, was that all Chinese nationals would have to register with this, or anybody who came from China, and it freaked a lot of people out. A lot of Chinese Canadians didn't understand it, and they thought, and that may have hurt them politically, at least in that one riding.
If you're just joining us now, no, it's not 5 o'clock at night. We're here with an early edition of Power Play as we watch former Governor General David Johnston testify for 3 hours before a committee up on Parliament Hill. We're about halfway through that testimony. The members of Parliament sitting on the committee have taken a quick break to cast their votes on other matters in the House. That testimony will continue all the way until 1 o'clock Eastern, and you'll be able to watch it live here. I want to play for you a bit. We've been talking about kind of the substance of whether or not there should be a public inquiry, the level of foreign interference occurring in this country, which certainly there have been a lot of questions around. There have also been a lot of questions directed at Mr. Johnston personally and sort of the nature of his relationship with the Prime Minister, because there have been a number of questions surrounding that and criticism from the opposition. Have a listen to a little bit of what he said on that issue.
Madam Chair, telling the truth with connection with my relationship with Prime Minister Trudeau goes back to when our children were teenagers, and during the course of almost 40 years, we had no meetings, no dinners at one another's homes, no particular contact. Was a friend of the father, etc., but those were the extent of the contacts.
There's been some questioning, Glenn, from both the Conservatives, especially off the bat, but then also the Bloc Québécois, kind of, juxtaposing what Mr. Johnston has testified to here and what he said when he released his report with some of the comments he had made previously. Basically, we know each other, we are in the same social circles, this is kind of what he says now, but we are not close friends, compared to other interviews he's given in the past in which he characterized the friendship as a close one, and then also the Prime Minister at certain times, and some MPs have flagged previous interviews to that effect, has characterized the relationship as close.
It doesn't seem to be totally lining up, but I think we have to take David Johnston at his word, what he's saying today. He is, he's never been really pressed on this by reporters and certainly not by MPs on a parliamentary committee about the nature of his relationship with Justin Trudeau. He's laid it out today. There was, 4 or 5 times that their kids skied together when Justin Trudeau was about 11 years old. Then there's this 40-year gap. Then they become neighbors at Rideau Hall. And Johnston, at some point in an interview, either expressed the desire or referred to the fact that it had happened, that his grandchildren would play with Trudeau's children at Rideau Hall. Today, Johnston said, well, that never happened. It would have been nice if they could have had play dates across the RCMP fence. I don't know how that would have worked. Anyway, it's starting to sound a little silly, that stuff, right? I mean, okay, people in the political classes in Canada tend to know each other pretty well. I mean, how many of our leaders on both sides of the fence have come from Westmount, Quebec, and have been neighbors? Paul Martin and Brian Mulroney. I think they shared a housekeeper or a nanny at some point, right? So there is a very kind of close connection, and I think trying to find somebody who is untainted by that, who doesn't know. If you're the Governor General, you are going to know somebody who was the Prime Minister, obviously, and earlier than that, it sounds like he was closer friends with the father.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting Glenn, but the committee has resumed, so we'll go back to it and listen in live.
Permis la présidence.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, through you, Madam Chair, when you were asked earlier to reconcile the briefing that Aaron O'Toole had from CSIS, in which he was informed that he and the Conservative Party were targeted by Beijing and, among other things, the Beijing regime and Beijing actors, including the United Front Work Department, amplified and spread disinformation, versus your conclusion that you could not trace that disinformation to a state-sponsored source. You said, quote, evidence that we had before us that permitted us to come to the conclusion you've suggested what was available to us at the time, end of quote. So are you saying that you didn't have all of the material evidence and intelligence when you drafted your report?
Madam Chair, through you, when we drafted our report, we had the intelligence then available from CSIS and other sources, and that was the basis of our conclusion.
You had intelligence, but you said it was based on what was available to us at the time, and that, quote, much greater step in terms of what should have been done, close quote, was what you said in answer to your effort to try to reconcile what you said versus what Mr. O'Toole said based upon the information that he had received from a CSIS briefing. So again, I put it to you, how do you explain that?
Madam Chair, we reported on what was available to us. What transpired in the discussion between the director of CSIS and Mr. O'Toole, I don't know, but the issue of
who selected the CSIS information that you relied upon in your report?
We had significant information, Madam Chair, from CSIS, and we had information, of course, from other agencies such as the National Security Advisor and so on, and direct testimony from heads of the different agencies.
I would submit the only way to reconcile what Mr. O'Toole says versus what is in your report is one of three things. Either you omitted material information, you misinterpreted that information, or this government withheld that information from you. And I will put it to you more specifically that at page 25 of your report, you, in reference to the September 8th Global Times article that contained disinformation, but Global Times being a Beijing-controlled entity, at page 25 of your report, you state that with respect to that disinformation from the Global Times, that, quote, the recirculation could not be attributed to any state actor. How did you come to such a conclusion?
Madam Chair, we came to the conclusion set out there on the information that was available to us at that time.
Well, okay, thank you for that, because the information that was available to you at that time surely would have included a rapid response mechanism report dated October 18th, 2021, that stated, quote, Chinese Communist Party media accounts on Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, have published videos that repeat a Global Times headline published on September 8th that suggests the CPC's platform would lead to China to break off relations with Canada. A Communist Party media account, including one Douyin account that had 26 million followers. You had that information. So in the face of that, why did you say that the Beijing regime that there was no evidence that the Beijing regime was involved in the recirculation of that disinformation?
Madam Chair, through you, the answer to the question is our conclusion was that we could not find direct attribution to any state actor. There was no question that there were activities, but tracing it to the state actor directly was not a conclusion we could come to.
Rapid response mechanism attributed it to a state actor, a Communist Party media account. So what part of state actor doesn't equal a Communist Party media account?
Madam Chair, if I understand the reference, I'm looking at our report which speak about WeChat of an article from the Hill Times. Is that the
No,
reference?
it's the Rapid Response Mechanism report of October 18th, 2021, one of the very few documents that have been produced to this committee. Surely you had seen it.
Madam Chair, with respect to that, the information that we had did not permit us to conclude that there was a state-sponsored force. There may be other information that would make that clear, but that was not clear to us at the time.
Communist Party media accounts with one account having 26 million followers, but you made the unequivocal statement that there was nothing to indicate recirculation and amplification by the Beijing regime. You further cite on page 25 of your report that in reference to the misinformation directed at then Member of Parliament Kenny Chiu, that it too could, quote, not be traced to a state-sponsored source, even though, Mr. Johnson, were you not aware that on September 10th, an account associated with HuiNet, I'm mispronouncing it, but HuiNet, which is connected to the United Front Work Department, posted disinformation from another Global Times article, this time targeted at Kenny Chiu, and yet you make that unequivocal statement in your report. How is that possible?
Madam Chair, through you, let me refer specifically to what we said on that matter in page 25. Chinese Canadian MPs, including Mr. Chiu, were and remain of particular interest to the PRC. There was online misinformation about Mr. Chiu's proposed foreign agent legislation, which he corrected in the media during the campaign. But the misinformation could not be traced to a state-sponsored source. The government does not regulate consumption of social media during elections or otherwise. However, it has engaged with social media platforms to deal with misinformation and the threat that it poses to election security. This does not include WeChat, which is based in the PRC.
Thank you. Madame Romanado.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, I'd like to thank Mr. Johnston for being with us today, and thank you very much. And first, I'd like to apologize to you and your team for some of the personal attacks that have been thrown out there with respect to the integrity of yourself, your team, and the work that you're doing. But I do want to thank you for the task that you have at hand for a very serious issue. Mr. Johnston, I read the report multiple times, and I have to say the conclusion I come to is that it is able to determine some of the statements and debunk some of the misinformation that was out there. The fact that references to the information that led you to come to those conclusions are part of the confidential annex that is included in the report, obviously for those who have the top secret clearance to be able to see it. Two things. We're hearing that there may be additional information that you did not have access to. You testified earlier that the leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre, was invited 4 times to provide additional information for your consideration in this issue, did not provide that, merely received copies of media reports. We understand that the Cummings report coming out of the last election was not provided to you. Is there anything else? Gathering intelligence is something that is ongoing. This is not something that you have one piece of the puzzle and it doesn't change. Do you have more? Do you need more information in order to continue to conclude to the work that you are doing?
Madam Chair, through you, 2 observations. One is, as we've been dealing with an ocean of information in 8 short weeks, it's like painting a picture where you have different brush strokes and you need brush stroke after brush stroke until finally a picture emerges. And developing a synthesis from that is very, very key. Am I confident that we saw every bit of information that we would like to have had or perhaps should have had? Given the ocean of information, the answer is no. I'm not sure how we could absorb any more than we had in the space of 2 weeks, of 8 weeks. What more needs to be done to that? Well, I think it comes to the machinery system that we indicated is in need of major reform, and that is having a much better clarification of when something moves from intelligence, this emerging picture, to something that becomes a threat and is passed on. We simply don't deal with information as well as we possibly should.
So actually on that note, it was something we heard in earlier testimony, Mr. Johnston, that intelligence agencies really don't understand politics and political parties and politicians don't really understand intelligence gathering and so on. And so that is something that needs to be improved in terms of making sure there is a two-way dialogue between these 2 stakeholders in terms of foreign interference. One other thing I would question, given that PROC is looking at this issue, we have NCCOP, we have NCIRA, yourself are looking at this, other, I believe, committees are. Would you recommend that perhaps members of this committee receive the necessary top secret clearance to be able to see the same information that you have in terms of the annex that clearly demonstrates how you came to the conclusions that you have? Would you recommend that, or would that be a duplication of efforts with respect to NCCOP?
Madam Chair, with respect to the second of those 2 questions, I think that is something that should be looked at very carefully, particularly if it permits parliamentarians to perform their proper functions. Other jurisdictions have had experience with that. They have review committees like NCCOP, but expand the cone of silence, so to speak, and the opportunity to get at this to make intelligence decisions in Parliament makes sense. Whether every parliamentarian should necessarily have that clearance, it may not be, but I think we could expand considerably how we involve parliamentarians more. And in particular, when it comes to issues that affect individual parliamentarians, like their safety, it's very clear to me that we have a much better job to do into getting past, this must be kept secret, we can't tell you about it because it will destroy our forces. I think we have to find ways of bringing those folks into the confidence. On the first question, you're quite right. We have a culture with intelligence agencies to keep things secret, and for very good reasons. They have sources whose lives are at stake. They have confidence that they have to share with other intelligence agencies. But I think other jurisdictions have made some strong efforts and successful efforts to deal better with that declassification, classification nexus. And I think that's a job we have to do here.
Thank you very much. And two last points. So with respect to our intelligence assets, I'm sure you're aware, Mr. Johnston, that my two sons are in the military, one of which is an intelligence officer. So I understand full well the importance of understanding national security and understanding the difference between a classified need to know versus putting our assets at risk, as well as our relationships with Five Eyes. But one thing we did hear is that a lot of parliamentarians and or their staff won't recognize what is foreign interference. Would you agree that there's some education that needs to happen to make sure that we can be a partner in finding the solution to combat foreign interference?
Madam Chair, through you, first of all, I salute your two sons and their service, which I admire very much. Secondly, how we refine that information and put it into palatable, understandable form is a major challenge. And we have, as we pointed out, challenges with respect to that must be addressed and improved.
Thank you. So bells have just ended. What we're going to do is do the 6 minutes for Monsieur Terrien, and then we will take a break to make sure everyone has voted. So we will let Monsieur Terrien avoir son 6 minutes.
Mr. Terrien can have his 6 minutes without an interruption. Then we will have a break to make sure that everyone has voted. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson has talked a great deal about public hearings. When I refer to a public independent inquiry, often he said, I'm going to have public hearings. Mr. Johnson, I think I can turn to you. I think I've been kind. Mr. Johnston, can I say that? When we talk about public hearings, I'll give you an example. For example, if I'm a victim of Chinese interference via a police station, do you think I am going to turn up to a public hearing?
Madam Chair, certainly some people will not want to appear before a public hearing. That said, we will encourage anyone who wants to make a submission to us or write to us or account personal experience that they've had would be very much welcome, and we hope we can give that appropriate attention.
Merci.
Thank you for that rapid, precise answer. So that means that holding public hearings means we're saying to people, if you want to come and talk to us about foreign interference, you're welcome. But, for example, Ms. Cherry Wong recently said she would not go to public hearings. She is a member of the Canada-Hong Kong Alliance. She doesn't want to go to the public hearings because she's afraid of reprisals. That is the difference, Madam Chair, between a public hearing and an inquiry. A commission of inquiry will ensure that there are in-camera meetings and they can summons people and ask for these documents to be produced. In that way, these people in full security can go and have discussions and be examined and cross-examined, and this information can then be collected, and we will have a better idea of the way in which Chinese foreign interference is taking place in Canada. Mr. Johnston, do you not think that is a seducing idea, a seductive idea?
Madam Chair, again through you, I think it's quite possible and very appropriate that in the public hearings, one could have in-camera sessions. And in fact, since our review will continue with respect to threats to our safety and so on, I expect that we would have to go into camera, certainly to hear from officials with classified information. But with regard to any member of the public who does not want to be seen publicly but wants to tell a story that's important to a proper review, I think it would be very appropriate to arrange for those meetings to occur in camera with all the appropriate protection.
Donc,
So you are in favour of the idea of inviting people without putting legitimate pressure so that we get the desired information and be more effectively equipped against foreign interference. That is what I've taken from your statement.
Oui, c'est correct.
Yes, that is correct. So is that how we're going to shed light on foreign interference, by saying we'll invite people? And it's confirmed there's certain victims from the diaspora who are saying we will not go to these hearings. They've already announced that they will not go to public hearings. So there's going to be a lack of information and you will not be able to totally shed light on this. Will that mean you cannot fully fulfill your mandate?
Madam Chair, certainly I don't think one should try to force people to come either in the open or in a in-camera session to disclose if they don't wish to. They're Canadian citizens. They have a right not to do so. So that would be fully respected.
When we talk about a public inquiry, in camera is extremely important. And in situations such as the Maher Arar Commission, people were summoned and there was no threat to their physical integrity. So that is the proof that a public inquiry protects people who are victims of this type of pressure, and it allows us to collect the information. And we can get the most complete information possible compared to a public hearing. That is why there are several experts who were in favour of the public independent inquiry, and then now there are other experts who were against a public independent inquiry who changed their mind after reading the report made by Mr. Johnston. So to come back to the advisor, the senior counsel, Sheila Block, I'm not going to be lengthy on this. She has given $7,500 to the Liberal Party, and she was part of a funding effort, a fundraising event where the Prime Minister was present in 2021. Do you think choosing her as senior counsel allows you to have people's confidence who are waiting for solutions to Chinese foreign interference? Do you think having done this is a good gesture? Do you think it will mean that people have confidence in this special rapporteur?
Madam Chairman, again through you, Madam Block's credentials as a thoughtful, impartial person of great integrity are known throughout this land for any members of the bar who've been acquainted with her. And we've been, in my view, extremely fortunate to have her skills, her integrity, her commitment to improving our way of dealing with foreign interference. I just have every confidence in her, and that's shared widely across the land regarding her as one of the preeminent counsel that we have in this country.
Merci.
Thank you.
Écoutez,
Well, the Conservatives have insisted upon the fact as to whether you're a friend of the government or the Prime Minister or not. I have not really put that question for a simple reason. In the report, he blames the media and CSIS and the public officials, but he doesn't blame the government nor the ministers. I think this report is proof that he is the friend of the Prime Minister.
Madam Chair, we don't blame the media, nor do we blame public officials in our report. What we are calling for in this continuation of public hearings is to provide the ways of reforming our system so it functions in the interest of all Canadians and functions very well.
Thank you. I'm going to ask that we pause for hopefully not more than a minute to make sure everyone has voted and that your votes have been registered. So just pausing for 1 minute. I'll get confirmation and be right back. Try not to move.
All right, so we're bringing you live coverage from Ottawa of David Johnston. He is the Trudeau government's point person on Chinese interference in Canadian politics. He's testifying today before a parliamentary committee where he is being asked many questions by opposition MPs about his recent report in which he said a public independent inquiry into the issue was not the answer. That's led to a firestorm of criticism against him by those who say only a public inquiry will get to the bottom of the issue. Johnston has also been criticized personally for being too close to Justin Trudeau. Critics who say he's in a conflict of interest, not the right person to do the job. Let's bring in Glenn McGregor as we wait for the testimony to continue here. Glenn, just briefly, the big takeaway for you after more than 2 hours now of testimony.
A lot more attention being paid, at least in the initial innings of this hearing, about David Johnston's connections to the Trudeau family. Conservative MPs repeatedly pressing him on that, the NDP pressing him, and also the Bloc. Of course, remember, they all voted to have him removed as special rapporteur, and the government has not decided to agree to that request, and David Johnston said he was going to stay on. So they're questioning him about reports that they were, quote, ski buddies, that is him and Justin Trudeau. Johnston explaining that some 40 years ago that he had a condominium at a ski resort called Mont Tremblant, and that Justin Trudeau, who was then 11 years old, came over with his siblings to ski with David Johnston's daughters, who were about the same age. And then there was about a period of about 40 years where they really didn't have any contact until they became neighbors at Rideau Hall when David Johnston was finishing his term as Governor General, and Justin Trudeau, just elected as Prime Minister, had moved in to Rideau Cottage, but that seemed to be the end of it. But then finally, after a lot of this, we kind of got back onto the main point of this, was about the
We're just going to jump in here, Glenn, because the testimony is back up. So let's go back to Ottawa. David Johnston again answering questions from opposition MPs over his recent report and the issue of Chinese interference in Canadian politics.
Global News. There's been considerable media attention about an alleged transcript of this conversation. I reviewed the same intelligence report that was provided to the Prime Minister relating to this allegation, which I'm advised is the only intelligence that speaks to the issue. I can report the following. The allegation is false. Mr. Dong discussed the two Michaels with the PRC official, but did not suggest to the official that the PRC extend their detention. The allegation that he did make, that suggestion has had a very adverse effect on Mr. Dong. He continued to maintain close relationships with the PRC consular officials, at least through the 2021 election. Ministers and the Prime Minister went out of their way to defend Mr. Dong, whom they believe had been badly harmed by the reporting. They did not believe the media reports when they came out.
I'm just going to pause. I think Ms. Kwan is visiting committee today, so it's really exciting to have her. And so I think if we can just keep a glimpse on each other, then you can see, because I think it's just an exchange that she's trying to get to. So quoting from the report is appreciated. She's noted she has read the report. So looking for the answer as to however you feel best. Ms. Kwan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I've read the report several times over, so I don't really need Mr. Johnston to quote the report back to me. What I really need is for him to answer the question, to which he didn't. My next question then is this. Did he ask if the Prime Minister knew about what those irregularities were?
Could we be a little more specific about the irregularities?
The irregularities, Mr. Johnston, is what you cited in the report to say that irregularities were observed with Mr. Dong's nomination in 2019, and that there were well-grounded suspicion that irregularities were tied to the PRC consulate in Toronto.
The irregularities, I think, had to do with nomination meetings and busing in of people and students and so on, and some questions about whether Mr. Dong had been substituted for another candidate in the nominating process. I think they were that kind.
My question was if, Mr. Johnston, if you asked the Prime Minister knew what those irregularities were.
We did ask the Prime Minister about the nomination of Mr. Dong and the allegations that a previous member had been pushed out. And he indicated he was aware of that, and that there were reasons that the previous member stepped out and Mr. Dong received the nomination.
Sorry, my question was if the Prime Minister knew about what those irregularities were.
I believe that the Prime Minister was aware that there was some question about the actual nomination and the busing in of people, etc.
Okay. And so in the report, Mr. Johnston, you concluded that it was reasonable for the Prime Minister to take no action, even though in your own report you cited that there were irregularities and that there were well-founded suspicion. I guess from my perspective, I don't know how you can square that circle and how you can come to that conclusion when there were well-founded conclusion and yet no action was taken. The common refrain from the report, it seems to be no recommendations were made, so none were taken. And none were taken, and so that none were ignored. Somehow, the notion to say that I see no evil, I know no evil, so therefore there is no evil. But in reality, there is much more and much deeper than what is going on. So my question then is this: Can Mr. Johnston explain, did CSIS look into nomination processes?
Madam Chair, with respect to nomination processes, that is a very difficult area because they're governed by the rules of the party. And I think it's been a very difficult area to regulate, to oversight, and I think one looks to the parties to develop appropriate rules. I think CSIS has been conscious of the fact that nomination events have followed procedures that would not be the most attractive. But to date, I don't think CSIS has cast its attention into that area in great depth.
Yeah, I think that explains why CSIS makes no recommendation to the Prime Minister on this, because they don't look into it in great depth. But it doesn't mean to say there are no issues. And even in your own report, Mr. Johnston, you noted that there were irregularities and well-founded suspicion. So how could it be that you come to conclusion that for the Prime Minister to take no action, that it is actually okay? I really have deep troubles with that. I'd like to ask Mr. Johnston this question. Can you advise the committee, what is your concept of the appearance of conflict and what does that mean to you?
The appearance of a conflict of interest would be a reasonable person in possession of all the true facts, concluding that a person would not be able to provide unbiased judgment on a particular matter. But the key issues would be, one, a reasonable person, and second, all the true facts being in front of that person.
Did you check to see if Ms. PROC has donated to the Liberal Party or attended a Liberal Party fundraiser event with the Prime Minister before you asked her to join your team on this important work?
Madam Chair, again through you, I've worked with Ms. Block on an earlier occasion and have complete confidence in her and her colleagues to make any appropriate judgments on conflicts of interest. With respect to her contributions to the Liberal Party, she has made contributions to others, the parties, and has served the country with great eminence and so on. No, I don't believe that Ms. Block has a conflict of interest.
Thank you. We will now enter into our usual rounds. 5 minutes to Mr. Cooper, followed by Mrs. Sahota. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, through you, Madam Chair, I draw your attention to page 27 of your report, where you write that CSIS sent an issues management note that warned that MP Michael Chong was being targeted by Beijing to then Public Safety Minister Bill Blair and his Chief of Staff in May of 2021. Last Thursday at this committee, Minister Blair said something quite different from what you wrote in your report. He said CSIS did not make him aware of that information. So how can one reconcile, on the one hand, what you said in your report versus what Minister Blair testified before this committee last Thursday?
Could you just give me the paragraph reference of that? Page 25, did you say? Page 27.
I hope this is not taking my time. Page 27. 27?
Yes. And the paragraph again? Okay. CSIS sent an issues management note. Is that the question? No.
Yes.
Okay. CSIS conducted the briefing, but we understand from Mr. Chong's statements to the media that it did not include the detail with respect to his family.
I'm sure you're quite familiar with that. I hope you're familiar with that section of your report. It's a whole section.
Madam Chair, I'm attempting to get the context so I can provide a proper answer. It's clear to us that there was a breakdown in communication in warnings going from CSIS to Mr. Blair for reasons that I think have to be repaired, including who would receive information with what kind of equipment, et cetera. And I think that's been clearly indicated, and I think in this case the Prime Minister has taken action to ensure that there's a much
Mr.
better
Johnson,
protocol.
I just want to be respectful, but
I'm
I
going to
have
pause.
limited
I'm
time.
going to pause. I'm going to pause. Right here in this beautiful sheet in front of me is exactly how much time everyone gets, exactly how much time you've actually received. You'll notice where there is a nice exchange of one person speaking at a time, the beep, beep, beep goes off, and I let the conversation continue. So I've proven myself to you, Mr. Cooper. In the last round, you had 6 minutes. You were given 7 minutes and 12 seconds. You know why? Because it was a good exchange. We're getting good information. So once again, let's just take a turn back and forth. And any time that should be given to you, rest assured, all members, it will be given to you. Mr. Cooper, the floor is again yours.
Madam Chair, Mr. Johnson, through you, Madam Chair, at page 27 of your report, you say very specifically that an issues management note was sent to the minister in May of 2021 concerning Michael Chong, but that, quote, neither the minister nor his chief of staff received that because they didn't have access to what you refer to as the top secret network email. At committee last Thursday, Minister Blair said it wasn't an issue of access. In fact, he said, quote, first of all, there is no email, end of quote. So is Mr. Blair not being forthright in his testimony, or is there a material fact or facts that you got wrong in your report? I'm trying to understand, on the one hand, what Mr. Blair said versus what you say, which I can't reconcile.
Madam Chair, the question was what Mr. Blair received. Our understanding from Mr. Blair's testimonies to us is that he did not receive the memo indicating that that warning was there.
But a memo had been sent to his attention.
My understanding is that it had his name or office on it, but he did not receive it.
And that was sent through an email, a top secret email system. That's what your report says.
Yes, Madam Chair, the understanding that I have is very clearly email or whatever, he did not receive it. That was the testimony he gave to us. And that, for us, seemed to be a very substantial flaw in how information is crystallized and finds its way into the hands of recipients who have the accountability to act on it.
Well, it's impossible to understand how Mr. Blair could say there just wasn't such an account, but you say there is. So moving on to the member for Don Valley North, you state at page 23 and 24 of your report that, quote, I did not find evidence that Mr. Dong was aware of the irregularities or the PRC consulate's potential involvement in his nomination, closed quote. Did you find any evidence or intelligence that Mr. Dong was unaware of Beijing consulate's involvement in the irregularities that happened at his nomination campaign? At the nomination meeting?
Yeah, again, I'm trying to be careful of dealing with what's open information and what's classification information. With respect to the nomination meeting, there clearly were strange practices, unusual practices going on. We did not conclude from that that was directly laid to the hands of the People's Republic. There clearly was discussion between Mr. Dong and the consulate in Toronto, but that's the extent of my understanding.
Well, I asked you a specific question, and that was whether you had any information that he was unaware. And I want to ask you very simply, why did you not bother to interview Mr. Dong?
We, I think, interviewed the people who had information about this particular matters. Mr. Dong, at that time, I think, was proceeding with his own lawsuit, and that we felt that this was something that he should get on with.
Thank you. Mrs. Sahota.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the witness, when answering a question that was previously asked at the end, Mr. Johnston, you had stated that you had worked with Ms. Block previously. Can you elaborate what that previous work was?
Yes, in I think about 2007, 2008, the Prime Minister, Mr. Harper, invited me to review allegations of involvement of Mr. Schreiber, Mr. Karl-Heinz Schreiber, with the then Prime Minister Mulroney, who had then stepped down from office, and to strike the terms of reference for an inquiry into that particular matter. And Ms. Block I reached out to assist as senior counsel. She and a team from the Tory law firm did so, and were eminently helpful and capable in that.
Okay. And I guess her work was good during that interaction, that you had decided to retain her services again at this time?
When I did ask her to assist in that respect, she was referred to me as the preeminent counsel in the country to do that kind of work, and that proved to be the case.
Okay, thank you. So through this process, Mr. Johnston, you've been given thousands of documents. You said you had only so many weeks, and you had ample evidence that was provided to you, including intelligence. You interviewed officials, ministers, the Prime Minister, members of security and intelligence community. You then looked at unverified allegations that have been floating around either in the media or made by politicians. And then you took a look at the substance, the material that you were provided to come to conclusions. I wanted to walk you through some of the conclusions and ask for, a little bit of elaboration on explanation as to why you came to those conclusions. So on the allegation that the PRC gave $250,000 to 11 political candidates for the 2019 election. That was the allegation in the Global News of report of November 7th, 2022. You stated in your report that, and I quote, "No recommendations were made to any minister or the Prime Minister about this allegation, and therefore no recommendations were ignored." Can you expand on how you came to this conclusion?
Well, we set that out, I think, on page 21, and we just finished by saying, and National Security Advisor Thomas and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff both testified to this committee that there was no evidence of money flowing to federal candidates. I asked the Prime Minister and other ministers if they or their staff knew anything about money being transferred to federal candidates in the 2019 election. They indicated that they had not heard anything about this until the media reporting. The Prime Minister pointed out that he's not briefed on matters that are not supported by reliable intelligence. No recommendations were made to any minister or the Prime Minister about the allegation, and therefore no recommendations were ignored.
And then on the allegations that there was a network of 11 federal election candidates and operatives, at least some of whom are witting affiliates of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. This is what Global News reported on November 7th, 2022. You stated in your report, and I quote, "Conclusion is that there was no evidence presented to any minister or the Prime Minister that any of the 11 candidates or any group of candidates were working together as a part of a network. No recommendation about a network of candidates was made, as no network was known to exist. No recommendation was ignored." Can you expand on this conclusion? How did you derive at this?
Well, it was based on both open and classified information, first of all. And what we say a little bit earlier on page 22 is the PRC has leveraged proxy agents and has tried to influence numerous Liberal and Conservative candidates in subtle ways. There's no basis to conclude that the 11 candidates were or are working in consort, that is, as a network, or understood the proxy's intentions. Some of the candidates are well integrated with Chinese Canadian community organizations. There's nothing inherently suspicious about this, as it is common for political candidates to rely on community support. In a nutshell, I guess, based on what we received, we could not see the evidence of an integrated, tight network working as alleged to have occurred.
Thank you. We've discussed this a little bit in some previous questioning, but I want to be clear on the allegation that Han Dong advised the PRC consulate to extend the detention of the two Michaels. Global News was very confident in their reporting on this. You found that to be false. Can you expand as to why you found that to be false?
Well, the reference I think that Global News had was to a early draft of an understanding of what transpired in a conversation between a member of the PRC consulate and Mr. Dong. That was subsequently superseded by another interview that indicated the suggestion in the first one that he had suggested the two Michaels be detained further was simply a wrong interpretation, just a misinterpretation.
Thank you. I know. I was just saying that we should make sure mics are off, so that the floor doesn't go back to colleagues. Thank you, Mrs. Sahota. Monsieur Terrien, 2 minutes.
Mr. Terrien, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnston, you mentioned that you met with witnesses that had relevant information so that you could draft this report that you submitted a couple of weeks ago. I have a few questions on that. First of all, did you meet with the Director of the Elections, Stéphane Perrault?
Madam Chair, we did not meet with the director, Mr. Perrault, because there were no complaints before him or the Canada Elections Commissioner with respect to interference. We anticipate that we would be meeting with him and his colleagues as we look at improving our systems, including any suggestions that can be made to help the Canada Elections Commission work more effectively.
But unless I'm mistaken, Chinese interference is attacking the Canadian electoral system and perhaps the Quebec electoral system. You don't think it would be relevant to meet with the current Director of Elections? It seems that from the outset you should have met with Mr. Perrault, because he is at the heart of what's happening in terms of the election process in Canada. I'm really taken aback to hear that you haven't met with him, but I've understood your answer. Have you met with the Commissioner of the Elections, Caroline Simard?
Madam Chair, with respect to both the Canada Elections Commissioner and the Chief Election Officer, Madam Simard, there were no complaints registered with the Commissioner or the Canadian Elections Officer for us to follow up on with the 2019 and 2020 election. And for that reason, we did not meet with them, but would expect we would in our subsequent work.
So there was no complaint, but there's 11 candidates, and you've said in your report that they were victims of a certain form of interference in the election. These were candidates for the election, but you're saying, as there's no complaint, I'm not going to meet with the Commissioner of the Elections, the Director of Elections, and the Chief Election Officer. Is that correct?
Well, Madam Chair, we expect that we will meet with those two officials in subsequent review. What I was saying is that our understanding, there were no complaints directed to them that required action with regard to the 2019 and 2021 election.
I'm really aghast at what I have heard. That's how I round off.
On continue avec Monsieur.
We'll continue with Mr. Julian, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank Mr. Johnston for being here today. I wanted to follow up on the question that Ms. Kwan asked you about the vetting of Sheila Block. It was unclear to me whether it was an honor system where you expected her to step forward with concerns or her donation history, or whether you were aware of all of those donations, and to your mind that didn't represent any problem given the important work you were assigning to her.
Madam Chair, again through you, with respect to Ms. Block, I reached out for her, one, because she's an eminent counsel, highly qualified, and worked with her in another difficult situation.
That's not the question. With respect, Mr. Johnston, it's whether you were aware of her donation history or not.
The answer was I wasn't aware of her donation history, and it wouldn't have occurred to me to inquire into that because her reputation and integrity is impeccable and continues to be so, in my view.
Mr. Johnston, we've heard a lot today. Conservatives have been citing and quoting Liberals praising your decades of public service. Liberals have been quoting Conservatives praising your public service. There's no doubt that you have a long history of public service. And we've spoken to this in the House as well, that a motion was adopted by a majority of parliamentarians. In a minority parliament, parliamentarians read your report, considered that before they cast their vote. And as you mentioned at the outset, you have a deep respect for Parliament. So I find it perplexing. How could you have deep respect for Parliament and when there is a clear parliamentary vote, ignore that clear parliamentary vote, asking you to step aside so that we could have a public inquiry, which of course most Canadians want to see as well?
Madam Chair, again through you, I do have deep respect for Parliament, and I hope I've given good evidence of that through my life and through my time as Governor General. The reason that I'm continuing in this position with respect to the motion of Parliament is that I believe the vote was based on allegations that were false, and that it would be wrong for me to simply step aside and say, well, let those allegations stand. You know, that's fact, that's the truth. So be it. That would not be the right thing to do.
Mr. Johnston, with respect, you can't determine how parliamentarians vote or why they vote that way. But as you mentioned, you have a deep respect for Parliament. You do need to heed a parliamentary vote. And I would suggest, as a parliamentarian who cast that vote, I was well aware of your long history of public service, but simply disagreed profoundly with your conclusions.
Well, Madam Chair, I was asked by the government of the day to undertake an important task to review foreign interference in our elections. I undertook that task and would intend to continue it until my services are simply no longer useful or required. So that's the reason why, with great respect to Parliament, I have a...
Thank you. Ms. Dancho, followed by Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Johnston. Thank you for being here, Mr. Johnston. We appreciate you participating in this important democratic process to hold the Liberal government accountable, as is our duty as His Majesty's official opposition. So thank you again for being here today. I want to ask you a question briefly about your report. I'm sure you're aware there are multiple, or there have been multiple Beijing police station operating at various locations across Canada for the purpose of intimidating Chinese Canadians, students from China studying here, and to silence their democratic right to debate and freely criticize foreign governments. And I was disappointed, however, to see that that was not included in your report. Can you explain why?
Madam Chair, the activities of the workstations are nefarious, widespread here in Canada and here in other jurisdictions. They are the subject of RCMP investigation, which is a rather unusual situation. And because of that investigation going on and oversight activities, we felt it was appropriate to see that investigation through.
Thank you for your answer. I do feel, though, however, that it is warranted and certainly encompassed in the foreign interference sphere that has been talked about quite a bit, and I see that you're nodding in agreement, so I appreciate that. But I do feel that leaving it out does feed into a bit of the perception of bias that has been a criticism of this report and of you leading the report, in the sense that has been a failure of the Liberal government to drag its feet on bringing forward the Foreign Registry Act, Agents Registry Act, which would be the vital tool needed to hold those accountable operating these illegal Beijing police stations that are a very clear violation of our sovereignty, a slap in the face to all Canadians. And yet the tool we need to hold those accountable who are responsible for this, again, the Liberal government has dragged its feet for a number of years. I do feel, sir, that would have been a well-placed criticism within this report, but there were very few, if any, criticisms of the current Liberal government in the report. And I found that concerning as well that you had left out the Trudeau Foundation, given the leaked report from CSIS that $140,000 had been given through various channels from the Communist Party of China to the Trudeau Foundation, which CSIS said in the leak through a wiretap was found to have been donated for the express purpose of influencing Justin Trudeau, who would ultimately become the Prime Minister. So again, not including that as well leads to perception of bias, sir, whether warranted or not. That certainly, I think, is a valid perception that many people beyond the Conservative Party have pointed out. And I do feel, sir, that, and again, I appreciate that you do not see a conflict of interest with Justin Trudeau or the Trudeau family, but I do have to point out that it is not normal or common, certainly, in Canada that people are friends with Prime Minister's sons, that people have dinner with them, that people go skiing with them. I am a McGill graduate, sir, and I appreciate that you were also at McGill, but you mentioned several times that you ran into Justin Trudeau at McGill, that you saw him there. I can tell you when I was at McGill, I didn't know who the president was, let alone run into him or her on multiple occasions. So I do feel that perhaps there is, because of your long career and your service to Canada, but you have very clear connections to a very elite group of what some call liberal insiders that perhaps you don't recognize. And that has provided a very clear perception of bias with your appointment, sir. Whether rightfully or wrongfully, I do feel that that perception, that those who hold them for good reason in this regard. And ultimately, sir, while the report is extensive, it does really downplay a lot of the concerns and the leaks that we have seen and from reputable journalists in the Globe and Mail. It denies certain ones, it calls certain other ones false, that the conclusions were false. You are quite critical, though I do appreciate that you don't see it this way, but this report, sir, is quite critical of media and their discussion of these leaks in the news to tell the public. It is also quite critical of the Conservative Party and the way that we've held the government accountable upon learning on these leaks. And yet, again, it is not very critical at all of the Liberal Party, despite the fact that they have really not held anyone accountable for the police stations, for the intimidation of MP Chong, MP O'Toole, MP Kwan, MP Chu, for the targeting of the Conservative Party of Canada. In fact, the one diplomat expelled would not have been expelled if those leaks had not happened, and yet there is nothing critical about the lack of action to hold anyone accountable for these things in this report. So, sir, I respectfully to you and through the chair, I do feel that the perception of bias is warranted both in the report and given your history with the Trudeau family. And certainly I will just conclude, Madam Chair, that I urge you to respect the will of Parliament, Mr. Johnston, in 3 votes calling for public inquiry, and that you respect the will of Parliament in honorably stepping down following that. Thank you, Mr. Johnston.
First of all, with respect to no criticism of the government, the report goes into quite considerable detail to say we have a system of dealing with foreign interference that is not working, and point out a number of the areas of defects. Have welcomed the initiatives that have been taken, such as working to now establish a foreign agents registry, which would put that in the public realm. That's been a matter that has had to study because it's got pros and cons, but I think there's action on that. That's very encouraging. With respect to friendship and acquaintances and so on, you suggested that somehow my realm of friends is senior Liberal Party people. I've been fortunate in my life to be the president of 2 important universities in this country, involved in somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen inquiries, advisory boards, and so on. In the course of that kind of work, one is given the opportunity to meet with senior officials, be they Conservative or any other party. And that, for me, is simply part of my life. So as to suggest that I'm part of a Liberal clique is just wrong.
Thank you. Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnston. I was comforted in a sense by the fact that you invited scrutiny into your own findings of your report by giving the opportunity for all parties represented on NSI COP and the security and intelligence experts through NSIRA to review your findings. You've also said today multiple times, and I know it's in your report as well, that opposition leaders were invited and you encouraged them to review the facts in the annex of your report. I take it from Ms. Dancho's comments that she thinks by you calling something false, that that's a criticism. I think that's just a commitment to the truth. So how confident are you? It seems you must be quite confident in your findings and conclusions that you've drawn from the facts and within the context that other parties and individuals that you've invited to scrutinize your findings, that they would land on the same conclusions. How confident are you?
Well, what I would say, Madam Chair, through you, is that we done the best we possibly could in the 2 months we had to follow the facts as far as we can and apply the law. And we welcome the scrutiny, the overview of the 2 committees you referred to, joined by the leaders of the major opposition parties. And I think that's appropriate how these things should work, that our work should be held accountable as it is being here, but will be held accountable by committees that have expertise in this that are working at it very long. With respect to the media, we do said in our report, we're not casting any aspersions at media. Freedom of press is very important in this country, and we would be in chaos if we didn't have it, especially with respect to the rule of law.
Thank you for that. And I know that you must have had security clearance at the highest level in order to be able to review the intelligence documents within the context that you formulated your conclusions in your report. Were you impeded in any way in speaking publicly about your opinions about the government taking action or not taking action as a result of having that security clearance?
The answer to that question, Madam Chair, is no. We were not impeded. In fact, we worked very carefully to try to write a report that would put as much light as we could on this matter, but still respect classified information. And so there was no impediment to that, and we were very pleased to be able to push those boundaries a little bit more than they ordinarily would be in a public report.
Thank you. You know, one of the things that I've spent considerable time doing is reviewing all the things that our government has done on foreign interference since 2015. And I've heard time and time again, people make claims that are false, that the government hasn't done anything. I note in your report, you spent a considerable number of pages, I think it's roughly page 30 to 49, so almost 20 pages of the report, and you've concluded that while more can, and I'm quoting you, while more can and must be done to strengthen our ability to detect and deter foreign interference, the extent of the government's policy, initiatives, and regular communications on the topic contradicts suggestions that the government intended to hide the existence of foreign interference, that it has negligently failed to act on it, or that it tolerated foreign interference. So can you just confirm again, it's not true that our government did nothing on foreign interference?
Madam Chair, through you, we set out a series of initiatives that had been taken over the course of, principally from about 2017 on. Russian influence was the main concern, then Chinese influence became that. There clearly was important activity. The concern is that that activity was not fast enough to catch up with the growing foreign interference, which continues. And what we have done in setting this out is also attempting to create a menu of other initiatives that should take place, some of which we expect to review in our public hearings to continue this job of being much more aggressive in recognizing the nature of the threat and then taking the prompt steps to counter it and deter it and deal with it in adequate fashion.
And if I may just follow up on that, I note that at some point, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but you had admitted that your assumption leading into your work as special rapporteur was that you would likely land on a public inquiry, and yet you didn't. You landed on public hearings. Can you explain why?
The public inquiry, Madam Chair, through you, would duplicate the work that we attempted to do in our work, especially dealing with classified information. And any public inquiry is going to run into that same problem. How do you deal with classified information in an open fashion and report upon it? Our view is that you could do that in particularly in the area of reforming our systems, looking at them carefully, thoughtfully, drawing the best expertise we can, reinforcing the oversight committees, and building on a better system of managing foreign interference and taking lessons from other jurisdictions, especially the Five Eyes, who've had considerable experience in dealing with exactly these challenges.
Thank you. This is bringing us almost to our end. So what we are going to do is 5 minutes to Mr. PROC, followed by 5 minutes to Ms. O'Connell, 2 minutes et demie à Monsieur T.
2 minutes and a half for Mr. Terrien, and 2 minutes for Mr. Julian, and then it will be 1 p.m. Mr. PROC.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be splitting my time, some of my time with my colleague, Mr. Chong. Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Johnston, aside from Navigator, are there any other individuals or entities assisting you currently?
Madam Chair, I have received informal advice from numbers of people, including professionals, but no one has been paid for their services apart from Navigator.
Thank you. Are Don Guy, Brian Top, or anyone else from GT and Company involved with assisting you?
Yes, those two individuals have provided advice to me, which was quite welcome.
Okay. Both individuals, Mr. Guy and Mr. Top?
Yes.
And when did that start?
Oh, Madam Chair, I think that started about 10 days ago, as I recall.
Thank you. Are you still receiving advice?
Yes, that is
Thank
the case,
you.
Madam Chair.
Anyone else from GT and Company that you've spoken to about foreign interference?
No, I think not, Madam Chair.
Okay. And are you paying Mr. Guy and Mr. Top for their services and advice?
Not at all, Madam Chair, nor, Madam Chair, are we paying for any other the informal advice that I'm receiving from a number of quarters.
Thank you. At least 3 times, Mr. Johnston, you've misquoted sections of your report in response to various questions of members of all parties. It begs the question, sir, who actually wrote this report?
Well, Madam Chair, the question is, I wrote the report and had considerable advice from a very competent legal team.
That includes Sheila Block?
Oh, led by Sheila Block, Madam Chair.
And her team?
Madam Chair, yes, I've been assisted by a legal team of experts.
And did you receive drafting assistance from the PMO?
Madam Chair, no, there would be no question of the drafting assistance from the PMO. We're completely independent in our work from the PMO.
Did you receive advice from the PMO as to what should be contained in the report?
Well, Madam Chair, we had continual discussions with PMO officials as we were seeking information and trying to get different...
Thank you. Did you receive drafting assistance from the PCO?
Madam Chair, the report is something I wrote with assistance from my senior legal team. That was it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnston, thank you for taking the time over the last 3 hours to appear in front of us. The core of your mandate, is to assess foreign interference in our electoral process. That's the core of your mandate. And in Canada, there is only one federal electoral process. And that is the process whereby Canadians get one vote for their local member of parliament. Everyone else in our system is appointed. The Senate is appointed. The Prime Minister is appointed, as you know, as a former Governor General. The Cabinet is appointed. Everyone else is appointed. The only electoral process federally in our system is for the House of Commons. It's the only part of our system that has an electoral process. It's the only part of our system that is democratic. It's the only part of our system where Canadians get a vote, and that is for the House of Commons. And the majority of the people's 338 elected representatives have voted 3 times in the last 3 months for an independent public inquiry. Yet you, with respect, and you alone have recommended against one. How can the government, of which you in this process you are involved in as independent rapporteur, how can you and the government restore trust and confidence in our democracy if the government continues to defy the democratic wishes of our only national democratic institution, the House of Commons?
Well, Madam Chair, through you, I was asked by the government of the day to undertake a job to review foreign interference, and that included the question of whether a public inquiry would be the best way to do it. After a very thoughtful consideration, we concluded that that was not, but that conducting public hearings on the matters that were not classified information would be a very appropriate way to build trust in our institutions. And that work continues to be very important, and I think we need to bring a sense of urgency to get on with that task.
Just a very, maybe a quick, very different question, Madam Chair, a very short one. Mr. O'Toole indicated that the report had been sent to translation on the weekend before he had met with you. On what date had the report been sent to translation?
If my memory serves me, for translation, but on the basis that we get the translation started and that there would be changes and amendments to that report within the 2 days following our meeting with Mr. O'Toole, which I again, as emphasized, was an extremely important and helpful meeting. We made changes to that report and ensured that they were in the translation.
Thank you. I know time is so short, and I did let you get one extra one in there, so I'll note that. Ms. O'Connell, same time to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was hopeful since my last intervention. We did receive some questions from the Conservatives on foreign interference, but it appears we came back full circle to a new conspiracy theory now of questioning if you actually wrote the report you wrote. But I think after 3 hours of desperation, that's what comes our way now. So let me get back to what we're talking about here. And Mr. Johnston, you spoke throughout your testimony today to the great care you took to write and share information that Canadians, everyday Canadians, can easily read and understand. This is something actually, as a former NSICOP member, that NSICOP looks at very carefully too. How do you write public reports that can be consumed by not national security experts? And in your report, what I appreciated so much was the comment about how you would be providing all of the information in which you based your recommendations or your findings on. You would be compiling that in an annex, and you would make it available for scrutiny. I think I wrote down, you welcome the scrutiny based on the information that you made your recommendations on. So my question to you through the chair is, do you actually think it's a reasonable line of questioning, or is it reasonable for people to question not only your integrity, whether you've written the report, what information you had or didn't have, when those very parties had the opportunity to read all of the national security confidential information, but choose not to? Do you think it's reasonable for someone who chooses not to read the information to then make judgments about what information you had or didn't have?
Well, Madam Chair, let me respond to that question in very generalized ways. I think when we're dealing with something as important and as growing as foreign interference in our elections and creating mistrust in our institutions, and by the way, those enemies are rubbing their hands with glee as they observe the kind of paroxysms that we're going through, we really have to work very hard at acquainting parliamentarians about foreign interference, but the public, who really understands very little bit of, and in this blessed country of Canada, we rather consider ourselves kind of protected. We don't have to worry about that. We do have to worry about that. It does create very challenging difficulties for us, and it will continue and get worse.
Thank you. And another criticism that often comes up about why certain party leaders won't receive national security briefings and review the information that you reviewed is they say they will be silenced. You have now been here for about 3 hours. discussing the very nature of this report, the information. You have the security clearances. You wrote an entire report based on national security, secure information. Do you feel that you are silenced from talking about these things when you wrote an entire report on it, and you've been here for 3 hours answering questions from all parties on the very matter in which has national security confidentiality in it?
Well, Madam Chair, the first thing I would say, this is accountability, and that's what Parliament is about and should be about. Secondly, I would say that that it's very possible for parliamentarians to take top security clearance, as some of you have, without in any way restricting their responsibility to speak publicly and openly about what they know in their head. What they have to guard against is disclosing classified information. And that's the difficulty we have with public inquiries that are supposed to shed light on things. When you have a problem of you've got classified information you just can't disclose for reasons we've discussed.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, because I've raised it in the House as well. I'm a former member of NSICOP, and being able to distinguish, and you said earlier in your testimony, it reminded me of the red folder, green folder. Sometimes it's hard to remember what is confidential and what isn't. But why it's so important to actually have these open conversations, that it's not a secret that you're trying to conceal from Canadians. It's about maintaining the sensitive nature of this information in a reasonable and respectful way that is ultimately in all Canadians' interest. But how do we have these more open conversations with Canadians so they have a better sense of what national security is all about in this country?
I'm a teacher, and I very much believe in seeing the world through the eyes of my children and now my grandchildren. I think we have to work harder at acquainting and educating our young people about our civic institutions and the quality of those institutions and how they're protected. Democracy is a very thin veneer, and it's like a garden cultivated next to the jungle, as Hugh MacLennan wrote in Voices in Time. It must be very carefully cultivated, because if it is not constantly cared for, the weeds and then the jungle will take it over. So we need the constant gardeners, and you people here, parliamentarians, are the constant gardeners. But I think we have to imbue in our young children a sense of the preciousness of this country, that we have much to protect, and that we must engage ourselves in that to be sure that the country is a better place for those who come after us.
Thank you. Monsieur Terrien, 2 minutes.
Mr. Terrien, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Democracy is under threat, and we have to ensure that the population has trust in this democracy. The population at 72% is asking for an independent public inquiry, and the House of Commons, as a majority, has asked for a public independent inquiry as well. Several experts are calling for this, and there's certain experts who are not asking for that at the beginning, but they've been convinced by Mr. Johnston's report and have joined their voice with the experts asking for the public independent inquiry. That's the only way when we can get the necessary documents to understand this foreign interference and limit it. It's the only way in which we can meet with the victims of interference in camera. What Mr. Johnston is proposing are public hearings where we're not obliging people, we're inviting victims, and certain victims have already said they will not come. Of course, it's less costly, his proposal, but how much does it cost to have a healthy democracy? Mr. Johnston said it would be quicker, but unfortunately, I think this will be shoddy work. It will be quicker, but it won't shed light. It's so fast that he hasn't met with Mr. Stéphane Perrault, who is the Director of Elections, and the Chief Election Officer, Caroline Sima. When we talk about something being done fast, I think we're saying that it's just been half done. We have to have a public independent inquiry. That is what democracy is asking for, and the House and the population. Mr. Johnston is talking about protecting democracy, but he is not respecting democracy. Madam Chair, I think that unfortunately his nomination is a case of bad casting. He has to step aside for the good of everyone. Thank you.
I have no response, Madam Chair.
I think I appreciate that. Mr. Julian, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, you ended Ella by saying you didn't meet with the Director of Elections because there were no complaints. But we know because Ms. Simard has come before this committee, and we know that there were several complaints about the question of foreign interference that are under investigation. Are you aware of the fact that the Elections Commissioner is actively investigating these foreign interference complaints about our elections?
We were aware of investigations, but no findings of interference with them. And our expectation is that we would continue to follow the progress of those investigations and meet with the Commissioner of Elections to have a good discussion about those.
But, Madam Chair, it's true that it's very important to have this meeting even before you take the decision to have a public inquiry or not. I've listened attentively to your testimony today, and you've talked about the fact that it would cost a bit more to have a public inquiry and perhaps would be a bit more lengthy, but you've also admitted the weaknesses in your current approach. You have clearly said at the beginning of your testimony that it is important for foreign interference to be recognised as a real threat to our democracy. So are you not worried that your testimony today and the fact that these contradictions are obvious to the Canadian population, are you not afraid that that would diminish the credibility of your approach? In particular, given that there are many parliamentarians who have voted against this approach.
The question is, do I have confidence in the public responding in one way or another? That is for the public to decide. We undertook this task and did the best job we could to build trust in democracy, and it will be reviewed by the appropriate review committees, and we welcome their suggestions and their conclusions.
Madame la Présidente, j'aimerais...
Madam Chair, I would like to propose something. I know there are certain MPs that still have questions. Could we have an extension of 16 minutes? Mr. Johnston has been very generous, I understand, but could we have 4 minutes for each party? So extend by another 16 minutes, please.
So, Mr. Julian, you want 5 more minutes to the Conservatives and 5 more minutes to the Liberals?
No, 16 minutes.
60 minutes, 4 minutes for each party.
Would be completed after 10 more minutes. I do believe with our committee having agreed to work through votes, if I summarize the amount of time, we're pretty close to 3 hours with the Right Honourable David Johnston. That's very generous for the amount of time. We do have resources. I think it's absolutely astonishing that we're doing this, but is that the will of members? Mrs. Sahota?
Madam Chair, in a couple of last rounds, we saw that members didn't even ask a question. They just used their time to make their comments. So if that's how this committee is going to be running, and we've seen ample evidence of that throughout the last 3 hours, I would say no. We release the witness and adjourn for today.
Do you want to call? I, for one, did know who my president was at my university. I know we didn't get to ski together and hang out together, but I do appreciate the service you've offered. I come into a situation as a chair, I do need to see the will of committee members. I do want to say that I find this very awkward because I did work with everyone to make sure we could find agreement to find a way forward. I actually thought we were quite credible in the way we did this, so I am concerned about this conversation. It will be noted. And Mr. Johnston, I know the caliber of an individual you are, so I know you're not going to say no. And so unless you want to, you can walk out right now. But otherwise, yes, I'm going to have to go with just another quick round. I apologize, at least on behalf of myself and some members. This was not the intention. And it's, who's going for the Conservatives? Mr. Chong, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Johnston, for agreeing to stay a bit longer. You mentioned in your remarks that there are 3 advisors for the second part of your mandate. Could you tell us who those 3 advisors are?
No, we have not begun that at all.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to focus on your second part of your mandate that you outlined in your report. You mentioned first by starting by referencing a quote on page 16 of your report. In the right-hand column halfway down in the second paragraph of that column, you say, quote, "There is no doubt that these communities are distrustful of security agencies." That's not entirely accurate. Many diaspora communities have been pleading with security agencies to do more to stop the foreign interference that they are subject to, particularly the Chinese Canadian community. Chinese Canadians are being targeted by Beijing, and they have rejected your proposals for public hearings. They're frustrated because they've already spoken up and testified over the last 4 years in front of the 4 parliamentary committees that I've referenced many times. The government has largely ignored their pleas for help, and they've suffered in silence. They're exhausted. They want more action, not these hearings that you're proposing. And I just yesterday evening looked at a partial list of members of the Chinese diaspora here who don't want this second phase of hearings, who want an independent public inquiry. Mabel Tung of the Vancouver Society in Support of Democratic Movement, Mehmet Todi of the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, Chemi Lamo of the International Tibet Network, Gloria Fung of Canada-Hong Kong Link, Victor Ho, the former editor of Tsingtao Daily, one of the largest Chinese language newspapers in the country, Sherry Wong of Alliance Canada-Hong Kong, and the list really does go on. All of these civic leaders in the Chinese community and many more have expressed a lack of confidence in your first report and in this process. So how can you possibly proceed with the second part of your mandate in light of that lack of confidence from many parts of the Chinese community in Canada?
Well, Madam Chair, and through you, our hope that we could encourage members of those communities to continue their work in trying to draw to the attention of Parliament and public generally of the dangers we're facing. We hope that the work that we have done, the review by NSICOP and CIRA, joined by leaders of the opposition, will provide a great deal of impetus to do much more of an active kind in providing the appropriate protection for these communities.
These communities that have been most impacted by PRC interference have been asking for an independent public inquiry. They put their hope in Parliament over the last 4 years that we would get some real action through Parliament. But unfortunately, because Parliament has been unable to do its job because of a lack of information from the government, a lack of documents, a lack of forthcoming testimony, forthrightness from government witnesses at committee, we've all in Parliament and amongst the diaspora community have now put our hopes on an independent public inquiry with the full powers of a public inquiry to subpoena witnesses, to call for the production of documents so that the government can be held accountable as to what happened and these long-standing issues can be addressed. What would you say to those who've said that an independent public inquiry can be held while at the same time protecting national security? Reference was made earlier to the fact that we've had inquiries before, like the Mayor Arar inquiry, which dealt with highly classified intelligence information. In fact, some of that information was Five Eyes intelligence. That is the most sensitive intelligence because it comes from our Five Eyes partners and not from domestic intelligence agencies. We've also had the former head of CSIS, Dick Fadden, say that a public inquiry is possible on this matter. And we've had Dan Stanton, the former a former CSIS officer and manager also say that a public inquiry is possible. We've had the former Chief Electoral Officer of Canada say that a public inquiry is necessary. So in light of all these calls for public inquiry, how can your second part of your mandate restore confidence in light of all these calls?
Madam Chair, through you, I would say there are other experts, including Ward Alcock, for example, who have suggested public inquiries are not the appropriate way, and Justice O'Connor, following the OR committee, made the same point. So there are differences of opinion on that, and those are reasonable. What I believe is that the work of our group, the Special Rapporteur, in fact, will provide a great deal of pressure and impetus on the government to act with greater acceleration on improving our system of dealing with foreign interference, and that the work that we will do over the next 5 months will add very considerable effort to that, so that I'm quite hopeful that we will see some very considerable action over the course of the next few months on this very important challenge.
Thank you. Mrs. Romanado?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank Mr. Johnston for extending his stay with us for another round. Just following up on that last line of question, the difference between a public inquiry versus the current process that is underway, I think a lot of folks are forgetting the fact that a public inquiry is actually named by an order in council, which is cabinet. Therefore, the same argument that it would not be independent could be said for a public inquiry, because at the end of the day, it would be cabinet deciding the terms of references and so on and so forth. We know that, Mr. Johnston, you've done the work of interviewing various people with respect to foreign interference. You've looked at the documentation. You've written a report. You will be conducting interviews and public hearings, which of course could include going in camera for those who may not want to, out of fear, testify. That would be the same situation in a public inquiry situation. If they're afraid to testify before you in a public hearing, it could be the same thing for a public inquiry. So the difference doesn't make sense. But you've offered that some meetings could be held in camera for those who would like to testify and any concerns they may have. Given that the next scheduled election is October 20th, 2025, and the goal, of course, should be we want to make sure that the systems that we have in place are as strong as they can be to detect, deter, and counter any foreign interference in our next election. If we're looking at forward-facing, you've already addressed some of the issues that we've seen with respect to communications problems. What would you recommend, in addition, that this committee suggests that we do to make sure that in a forward-facing goal to protect our democracy, is there something that this committee could also be doing to assist to make sure that we are ready for the next election?
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. I would encourage the committee to be very precise and very disciplined and very rigorous in accountability to improve our systems with respect to foreign interference. Yes, we have seen some progress and some changes. There is a clear outline of changes that are in process. In fact, in our next report, what we would like to do is to identify the initiatives that are currently under study, like the Foreign Review Registry, for example, but many others like that, and to see if there can't be timetables for dealing with these reforms, amendments to the CSIS Act and so on, and so that there's a very disciplined procedure to say, long before the next election of 2015, we can look at our Five Eyes colleagues and look to Canadians and saying, we are really working hard on dealing with foreign interference, and we're making real progress on it to restore confidence in Canadians that they can trust our governments to protect them.
So in that regard, your suggestion would be, and would you also suggest that NSICOP and CIRA also provide sort of a list of deliverables with respect to timelines to make sure that we're ready and that we check in perhaps, 6 months from now, a year from now, where people are at with respect to those recommendations?
Chair, I think that's a wonderful suggestion and should be done. And what's important about that for me is we have these overview committees with expertise, with the opportunity to go into deeply classified information, and to make those bodies as strong as we possibly can in their current existence and with amendments to how they were set up and so on, and ensure that they have the task of working with you and other committees of the House to be sure that we are truly making progress on this in an important way.
And last, you touched a little bit on the civics necessary for, and we touched about that a little bit earlier when I was asking the question. Evidence and intelligence are not the same thing. And how can we make sure that Canadians, parliamentarians, and everyone who wants to protect our democracy recognizes what does it look like? What are the tactics used by non-friendly state actors in terms of interference, and how they can be part of the solution in terms of reporting them, identifying, and this could be a Team Canada effort in terms of countering foreign interference. I think you would think this would be a joint effort from all Canadians.
Madam Chair, through you, one of our recommendations with respect to the public hearings of the next 5 months would to deal exactly with that issue. Bring the best expertise we can to it, learn from others who have been able to provide more light, and then helping to acquaint the public on this distinction and how we can manage it with more light on the subject.
Thank you. Monsieur Thérien?
Merci.
Mr. Tallien, thank you, Madam Chair. In the report from Mr. Johnston, he refers to problems of communication of information that comes from CSIS and goes up to the Prime Minister and ministers. In his report, he states that what we've heard in the media is more or less true. That's what he said. And in his report, he also says that the ministers and Prime Minister have not been informed. They were in ignorance, they didn't have the information. I'm not criticizing that, but he mentions in the trajectory of information that CSIS has its responsibilities and public officials have their responsibilities. But when I read about Mr. Stanton, Mr. Wyszynski, and Ms. Thomas and Ms. Warnick, they say that there is a problem in terms of the cabinets, the chiefs of staff. Could you comment on that?
Madam Chair, I agree entirely with the member who's just raised the question that we have much improvement to do in how we crystallize information, how we move it into responsible hands, how we ensure appropriate action is taken and have accountability for it. We have much work to do in that, and that's the task we should get on with urgency.
Je vois une question délicate.
This is a sensitive question. There are times when perhaps there are some things that's better not to know about. When it comes to the political chiefs of staff, are they reacting to that possibility that perhaps certain ministers or Prime Minister may say, look, it's better for me not to know this information? Does that sort of thing happen?
Madam Chair, I don't think I have much comment to make on what kind of messages are given that kind, but we expect from our public servants in this country that they will be nonpartisan, that they will be professional, and that they will provide clear information and recommendations to their ministers. And in our systems of ministerial accountability, we should expect that they would act appropriately. And when they do not, then we should hold them accountable.
Merci. Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Julian.
Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Johnston, for your generosity of time in allowing us a few extra questions. I want to come back to the issue of the contributions of Sheila Block. In questioning, you said that Ms. Block had contributed financially to other parties. What are you aware? Which parties has she contributed to?
My understanding is that her contribution has been quite widespread, and I think she has supported people in political office that bear other than the Liberal qualities, but I don't have specific information I can give you.
But she had told you that she had contributed to other parties as well.
I think that she has, yes, been supporting, prepared to assist other former students and people who have been affiliated with parties other than the Liberal Party.
In response to a question from Ms. Kwan, you said the appearance of a conflict of interest has to be fact-based. Those facts, or her frequent contributions to the Liberal Party, are part of the public domain. You do not understand why some people would question that appearance of a conflict of interest when those facts, we're not talking about speculation, those facts are before us?
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
You said an appearance of a conflict of interest needs to be fact-based. Yes. She's factually given thousands of dollars to the Liberal Party. So do you understand why people see that as an appearance of a conflict of interest?
Madam Chair, as I said before, I don't see Ms. Block's providing contributions to political parties as a conflict of interest. I think over a period of 15 years or so, it's I think something like $300 or $400 to the Liberal Party. But my understanding is that she has made contributions in a wide direction than former students and so on.
It's been thousands of dollars. My final question is, in your report, you said there is no evidence of illegal donations, but the only way to get this information we know is through the complaint process through Elections Canada, the Commissioner of Elections. That was certainly the case in the Dean Del Mastro case. Was that done? Was there any evidence around auditing campaigns? And since you didn't meet with the Commissioner or Elections Canada, how did you base that conclusion?
Well, based on the fact that our understanding from those officials is that there were no findings of fault, and certainly no activities leading to charges with respect to the 2019 and 2021 elections.
With that, the Right Honourable David Johnston, you've been very generous with your time today. On behalf of PROC committee members, I want to thank you.